As the party reached the outskirts of Hawthorne Manor, the once lifeless estate suddenly surged with movement. Lena Hawthorne, forgetting all noble decorum, rushed forward like a frightened deer. She threw herself into the arms of her father, Erwin, who had only just dismounted. "Father, you're really back," she sobbed, her voice breaking as she clung to him. Erwin, his own eyes moist, patted her back and whispered hoarsely, "It's all right, Lena, I'm back." Watching this touching reunion, Benjamin Blackwood stood to the side, even pretending to wipe away a stray tear. Eventually, Lena composed herself. She turned to Benjamin and performed an impeccable formal curtsy. "Lord Blackwood," she said, her blue eyes brimming with sincerity, "the Hawthorne family will forever remember your kindness. Your bravery in rescuing my father from those bandits will be known far and wide." Once inside the manor, the atmosphere shifted from relief to business. After a quick change of robes, Erwin regained his lordly decisiveness. He gestured, and servants carried in heavy wooden boxes. When opened, they revealed a dazzling hoard, 1,000 gold shields and jewels worth 1,500 more. "This is a token," Erwin said firmly, "to repay your life-saving grace." But the gold was only the beginning. Erwin handed Benjamin a parchment, a draft that paved a golden road for Benjamin's home, Frosttown. The terms were staggering: permanent tax-free passage for Frosttown's caravans, priority procurement for military timber and ores, and a free flow of artisans between their lands. Then Erwin dismissed the attendants, leaving only Lena and a few confidants. His expression turned grave. "Money is not enough," he admitted, looking out at his prosperous but vulnerable territory. "This kidnapping was a bucket of cold water. I thought wealth could buy security. I was wrong." He looked intently at Benjamin. "The king has passed. The struggle between the princes and princesses is intensifying. Silverstream needs a military ally, and you, Baron, are seen as the second princess's will in the West." A heavy silence fell over the hall. Lena watched Benjamin nervously, twisting the hem of her dress. Benjamin weighed the risks. An alliance would place him in the crosshairs of the kingdom's power struggle, but it would also make Frosttown unstoppable. Finally, Benjamin smiled. He stood tall and met Erwin's gaze. "A single tree cannot make a forest," he declared. "In the name of Frosttown, I agree to this alliance." With a firm hand, he took the quill and signed his name, binding their fates together against the coming storm. Benjamin returned to Frosttown in a grand procession, laden with the spoils of war and the weight of new alliances, but before he could even reach the threshold of his home, he was intercepted. Sullivan, his shrewd administrator, stood waiting with a stack of scrolls and a face etched with frustration. "Oh dear, my lord," Sullivan's voice rose in an exaggerated, pained wail. He complained that Benjamin had settled for far too little in the Silverstream agreements, less than half of what the Hawthorne family could actually afford. He paced, listing missed opportunities, dedicated storage areas, ceded border lands, all lost because of a hasty signature. Benjamin knew he was in the wrong. To avoid a lecture on tax-free certificates and procurement lists, he simply offered a wry smile and a shrug. He patted the administrator's shoulder with feigned gravity. "These troublesome matters are best left to you, Sullivan. I believe you will secure every bit of benefit Frosttown deserves." And with that, he slipped away. He had more important things to do. Thanks to the gold from Erwin, the construction of a new, grander baron's mansion could finally begin. But as he gathered his team, Walter approached with a furrowed brow. "My lord, what of the prisoner, the second son of the Viscount of Wolf's Mouth?" Benjamin waved a hand dismissively. "Keep him in the reinforced cell on the west side. See that he doesn't starve or freeze. Once the ransom arrives, we will release him." With the hot potato handled, Benjamin finally stepped onto the construction site. He felt a surge of adrenaline, reclaiming the expertise of his past life as a civil engineer. He rolled up his sleeves, gripped a sharpened wooden stick, and began to command. "First, lay out the lines," he shouted. He directed the workers with lime powder and stakes, personally squatting to check every angle. "The foundation is crucial. The water-cement ratio must be perfect, not too thin, not too dry." He moved with a beauty of order and efficiency that Frosttown had never seen. He introduced prefabricated doors and windows to save time, his voice ringing out over the sound of heavy wooden rammers. Chesvia, the Minister of Agriculture, watched from the sidelines with a teasing smile. "Tusk, Tusk, our Baron is truly multi-talented," she called out. "When will you build a decent place for my research institute?" Benjamin laughed, never taking his eyes off a positioning stake. Don't worry, Chesvia, once my walls are up, your institute is next. I've already drafted the blueprints in my head. As the foundation took shape, Benjamin's family, including his younger sister, Marie, watched from a distance. Her eyes were filled with wonder as she watched her brother transform a patch of dirt into the magnificent future of their house. Celia drifted in the softest folds of memory, back to time before the weight of the crown. In her dream, she was Cecilia, a simple traveler in a sun-drenched forest clearing. The air smelled of wildflowers and earth. Nearby, a campfire crackled, and a small pot of soup simmered with the scent of dried meat and wild mushrooms. Her gaze fell upon Benjamin. He wasn't praying or polishing weapons like the others. He was focused entirely on the meal, stirring a wooden spoon with practiced care. Noticing her, he looked up with a shy, genuine smile, free of aristocratic hypocrisy. "Miss Cecilia," he whispered, "the soup is almost ready. I added wild thyme to warm you up." In that moment, she wasn't a princess. She was just a woman being silently, meticulously cared for. She remembered the earnest expression on his face years ago as he bandaged her sprained ankle, but beautiful dreams never linger. Celia opened her eyes to a magnificent silk canopy. The scent of the forest was gone, replaced by the cold aroma of palace incense and parchment. Reality rushed back. Her ambitious brother, Prince Alchia, was moving to seize the north, while she was forced into a disgusting alliance with her viper-like younger brother, Conrad. Exhausted, she began sifting through a mountain of bad news: rebellions in the south, bandit raids in the Golden Valley, failed harvests. Each letter was a heavy straw upon her shoulders. Finally, she reached the last envelope. It was from Frosttown. She recognized the messy handwriting immediately. It was Benjamin. As she read, her furrowed brow began to relax. He didn't ask for help or complain. Instead, he reported a victory. He had rescued a kidnapped lord, defeated a band of mercenaries, and secured a vital alliance for her cause. At the end, his tone shifted. He told her to mind her health and offered to send smoked ham and calming herbs from the frontier. "It's written too seriously," she whispered, yet a smile touched her lips. Among a sea of letters filled with desperation, Benjamin's words offered something rare: vitality and hope. Celia picked up her quill. For the first time, the words flowed naturally. She wrote of her political struggles and her exhaustion, sharing secrets she told no one else. As the setting sun gilded the palace in gold, she felt the heavy clouds finally begin to part. Benjamin was more than a subordinate. He was the warmth of the campfire in her cold, lonely world. Ella was born to the nobility, a chosen daughter of the forge god. Unlike commoners who toil at the hearth, Ella possesses the blade of thought, a terrifying mental will that can melt solid metal into liquid slag in an instant. To her, this power is a divine mark of status, not a tool for labor. When Princess Celia appointed her as the Lord of Ironforge, the goal was strategic: use Ella's faith to stabilize the kingdom's vital industrial hub. But reality proved bitter. Ella loathed the soot-stained mines and the clanging of hammers. To her aristocratic mind, managing a territory meant issuing decrees from a throne, not consorting with dusty bastards in leather aprons. Her reign began with a disaster. When the local mining guild, the true backbone of the region, approached her with humble requests for better conditions, Ella snapped. "Enough," she barked, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you expect me to use divine power to mine for you? Do your jobs and stop bothering me." The insult was absolute. The guild retreated into a cold, silent strike, isolating Ella within her own castle. Soon, local nobles sensed her weakness and incited a full-scale rebellion. With no loyal soldiers and no tax revenue, the proud lady of Ironforge was forced to beg her former comrade, Calvin, for aid. Calvin arrived like a storm of steel. Leading 200 elite knights, he ignored Ella's attempts at a lavish banquet. "Where is the enemy?" he demanded, refusing to even dismount. Within 2 days, his ruthless efficiency crushed the uprising, leaving Ella feeling small and deeply envious of his disciplined ranks. The final blow, however, came in a letter from Princess Celia. The princess praised their old teammate, Benjamin, the man Ella used to treat as a lowly handyman. While Ella struggled to hold a single city, Benjamin had transformed the frozen wasteland of Frosttown into a thriving, allied power. The realization stung like acid. Benjamin, the boy who used to wash her robes, was outperforming her. Swallowing her immense pride, Ella sat at her desk, the quill feeling like a ton of lead. She began to write a letter to the handyman, masking her desperation with a thin veil of noble arrogance. She asked for his experience in governing, her face burning with shame as she sealed the parchment. The proud lioness of Ironforge was finally reaching out, hoping the boy from the frozen north might teach her how to lead. Hill's fingertips tapped rhythmically against the mahogany table, tracing the lines of a detailed map of the north. Outside, Pearl City thrived in its chilling prosperity. Inside, Hill maintained an air of absolute, calculated tranquility. She had come a long way from her days in the hero squad. No longer just a coordinator, she now possessed the profound, heavy presence of a true leader. A letter from Princess Celia lay before her, warning of Prince Arkia's high-profile northern tour. It was a calculated move that threatened the delicate balance Hill had fought so hard to establish. If the local nobles, those hyenas smelling blood, sensed a shift in power, her hard-won territory could vanish. However, it was a second letter that truly captured her interest. Her loyal scout, Evelyn, provided a rigid, objective report on Benjamin's progress in Frosttown. While the princess offered flowery praise, Evelyn detailed something far more radical, a system of governance Hill had never imagined. Benjamin was distributing land based on labor rather than bloodline, establishing public warehouses to stabilize prices, and personally designing urban drainage and ventilation. Interesting, Hill murmured. This pawn was evolving into something worthy of study. With a faint, knowing smile, she penned a routine greeting to Benjamin, keeping her distance while maintaining her grip. She had also heard whispers from the south. Finn was planning to send support to the busy Baron. Now, she whispered, sealing the letter, he is going to be in for a lot more trouble. Meanwhile, in Frosttown, Benjamin was a whirlwind of energy. Flush with funds, he stood amidst the foundations of his new mansion until his brother, Jean, rushed over in a panic. The blacksmith shop was failing, orders for plowshares and weapons were piled higher than the walls. Decisive as ever, Benjamin abandoned his mansion to lead a construction crew to the forge. He barked orders to tear down walls, expand the floor plan by 15 meters, and install a modern ventilation system. He was in high spirits until he felt a chilling gaze. Chesvia, his Minister of Agriculture, stood nearby with her arms crossed. Her gray eyes screamed betrayal. Benjamin had promised her a research institute next, yet here he was, building a bigger forge. "Oh, my dear Minister," Benjamin stammered, "this is urgent for the militia." Chesvia's silence was deafening. Benjamin cleared his throat, offering his most sincere, awkward apology. "I deeply regret this. I will definitely do it next time." With a skeptical huff and a look that promised he was being watched, Chesvia turned away, leaving the Baron to his hammers and his growing list of promises. Benjamin had just finished his morning workout with Walter and was preparing to inspect the blacksmith's expansion when his sister, Sarah, entered with a heavy stack of letters. Her face held a look of genuine surprise. "My lord," she began, "an unusually large number of letters arrived today, all at once, from many different places." Benjamin took the stack, feeling a strange chill. There were 6 letters in total, representing nearly every core member of the former Heroes squad. It felt like a group of teachers demanding a heart-to-heart after a final exam. He chose the first letter based on a subconscious priority, the royal seal of Princess Celia. The paper was fine, carrying a faint fragrance. Celia praised his recent victory at Silverbrook, noting how he had resolved the crisis with both sword and wisdom. Benjamin smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. But as he read on, the tone shifted into shadow. Celia spoke of an uneasy atmosphere in the capital. Her brother Arkia had set off for the north, and her alliance with Conrad left her exhausted. She wrote of feeling lost, gazing at the twilight and longing for the days they all rode together. She concluded with a gentle request for smoked ham from the northwest, a small taste of the north, and a sincere wish for his well-being. Benjamin folded the letter with a sense of satisfaction, though he knew he was too far away to help her with the politics of the crown. The second letter was from Calvin. It was brief and stern, much like the man himself. He congratulated Benjamin on Silverbrook but issued a sharp warning: if your sword is not sharp enough and your walls not strong enough, all glory will turn to dust. Benjamin wondered how Calvin had even heard the news so quickly. Finally, he opened the third letter from Hill. It contained a surprising revelation. Evelyn, Hill's subordinate, had actually praised Benjamin's command in her reports. Hill's writing was cryptic, suggesting Benjamin use Evelyn as he saw fit for any task. More importantly, Hill included a detailed analysis of the power shifts and bandit movements near the western border. Benjamin was thrilled. This intelligence was a godsend for a remote territory like Frosttown. As he looked over the maps and reports, he realized that while the princess offered him her heart, Hill had given him the eyes to see the coming storm. Benjamin reached for the fourth letter. Its sealing wax bore the mark of entwined vines and a feathered arrow. He felt a surge of genuine respect. This was the emblem of Finn, his former archery mentor from the hero's squad. Finn, the man who had once jokingly called Benjamin a once-in-a-century prodigy, wrote with a hand as elegant as a forest stream. The letter began with warm praise for Benjamin's governance in Frosthold, but the tone soon shifted, becoming heavy with the weight of command. Finn described the Green River territory as a chaotic melting pot of hostile tribes and bandit gangs. Unlike Benjamin's struggle with poverty, Finn was drowning in disorder. To Benjamin's surprise, his mentor humbly asked for advice, seeking innovative strategies to break the deadlock. Benjamin rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure. "This needs careful consideration," he whispered. "I cannot give advice casually. It would be a sin to lead my teacher astray." At the end of the missive, Finn mentioned he was sending a trusted guard named Diona to serve as a permanent representative and personal bodyguard. Benjamin sighed, realizing another informant was joining his circle. First Evelyn, now Diona. Still, as long as they were competent, he welcomed the extra hands. Then he turned to the fifth letter from Lauren of Golden Ear Valley. The parchment was expensive, smelling of trade and ambition. "Hey, my dear friend," the letter shouted in a passionate, infectious script. Lauren was a man of business, and he didn't waste time. He offered a lifeline of trade, grain seeds, refined iron, and medicinal herbs in exchange for Frosthold's timber and furs. But then Benjamin's eyes lit up. Lauren mentioned dust crystals, volatile stones that created a violent flash and bang. In a world of gods and magic, these were a rare tactical treasure for a lowly lord. Benjamin immediately began drafting a reply, his mind racing with calculations. Partnering with a tycoon like Lauren was the shortcut Frosthold desperately needed. As he set his pen down, only one letter remained, the one from Ella. Benjamin chuckled to himself, looking at the stack of correspondence. "Princesses, knights, spies, and tycoons," he mused. "My social circle is surprisingly diverse." He decided to save Ella's letter for after breakfast. Knowing her, it would likely be more exciting than all the others combined. The morning sunlight streams through the windows of the Baron's dining room, illuminating a table set with rough linen. Benjamin sits with his family, enjoying golden, fluffy pancakes prepared by Ms. Chesvia, the Minister of Agriculture. It is a rare, sweet treat, a silent apology for her department's recent delays. His sister Marie laughs with syrup on her face, and for a moment, the burdens of leadership feel light. After breakfast, Benjamin finally opens a letter from Ella. He expects her usual arrogance, but instead finds a document written in a bizarrely academic, roundabout tone. She is drowning in the mismanagement of her territory, Ironforge, yet her pride prevents her from asking for help directly. Benjamin nearly laughs aloud at her stubbornness. But he recognizes the desperation beneath the ink. He sets to work on a reply, offering a masterclass in diplomacy. He advises her to repair her relationship with the mining guilds, not with a groveling apology, but by establishing a mining development fund and granting them limited autonomy. He urges her to win back the commoners by fixing public wells and hiring clerks based on merit rather than noble birth. "Give them respect and space," he writes, "provided the final decision-making power remains with you." With the letter sealed, Benjamin shifts his focus to the upcoming Five Lords meeting. Lord Irwin of Silverbrook has made the stakes clear. The three neighboring lords are greedy and opportunistic. To secure their interests, Benjamin and Irwin must project absolute strength. Benjamin strides into the town square, where 100 Frosttown regulars stand in perfect, disciplined ranks. Their studded leather armor gleams, their spears stand like a forest of steel. These are not mere conscripts, they are the forged will of Frosttown. "Soldiers," Benjamin's voice rings out, "you represent the present and future of this land, uphold your dignity." "For Frosttown," they roar in unison. With Lord Irwin footing the bill for the expedition, Benjamin mounts his horse. He knows this conference is a war without gunfire, and his disciplined soldiers are the most powerful argument he possesses. As the column moves out toward Silverbrook, Benjamin looks back at his men with a heart full of confidence. The negotiations are about to begin. The atmosphere in the drawing room of Hawthorne Manor was heavy, thick with a tension that the crackling fireplace could not dispel. Lord Erwin Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping over the three men who had abandoned him in his hour of need. There was the burly Lord Guise of Blackrock, the elderly Baron of Ashmarsh, and the portly, sweating Baron of Stonebridge. One by one, they offered their hollow excuses. Ashmarsh spoke of urgent matters, while Stonebridge stammered about dredging waterways during the spring floods. Even the rugged Lord Guise claimed he was simply uninformed. Erwin smiled, a mask of polite grace, knowing full well they had simply been too terrified to offend the Earl of the Eyrie. "Gentlemen," Erwin said softly, "those are minor matters, now in the past. What matters is the future of our 5 territories." As he turned a page of his ledger, the Baron of Stonebridge tried to deflect his embarrassment by grumbling about the final guest. "Speaking of which, is Baron Blackwood of Frostwood late again? Such a lack of etiquette." Erwin interrupted him with a sharp, knowing smile. "Oh, please forgive him. I specifically requested that he lead his soldiers here to assist me with some minor troubles. After all, we are allies now." "Military cooperation," Stonebridge blinked, his small eyes darting to the others. Just then, a servant announced the arrival of the Baron of Frosttown. Erwin rose and led the curious lords to the window. As they looked out, the room fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. On the road below, Benjamin Blackwood rode at the head of a procession. Behind him marched nearly 100 soldiers. These were not ragged peasants, they were a forest of steel. Their steps were perfectly synchronized. Their leather armor gleamed, and their spears stood straight and menacing. It was not a militia, it was a professional standing army. Erwin felt a surge of ecstasy. The stronger Benjamin was, the more powerful their alliance became. He patted the trembling Baron of Stonebridge on the shoulder. "No need to worry," Erwin purred. "They are only here at my invitation, and they follow the rules." Benjamin entered the hall, his tone casual as he apologized for the delay, but the air had changed. The disdain the other lords once held for the border baron had vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp apprehension. Even Lord Guise of Blackrock, the most powerful among them, gripped the railing until his knuckles turned white. Erwin draped an arm around Benjamin's shoulder, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "Gentlemen, it is windy outside. Shall we go in? We have much to discuss regarding the future, especially with Lord Blackwood." Inside the grand conference hall of Hawthorne Manor, Benjamin Blackwood took a slow, steadying sip of golden mead. The silence was heavy until he broke it. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and professional, "let us discuss our progress." He reported that the roads connecting Frosttown to the Silverstream and Blackrock territories were now open to carriages. One by one, the other lords followed suit. The portly Baron of Stonebridge confirmed his bridges were nearly reinforced, and even the stoic Baron Guise of Blackrock grunted his approval. His section was more than halfway finished. As the tension melted, Erwin Hawthorne seized the moment. "The roads are the body's blood vessels," he declared, tapping the table for emphasis. "Now, we must make the blood flow." Erwin unveiled a bold 3-part scheme. First, a common market to slash tariffs on timber and ore. Second, a united commune caravan to trade their collective goods in the wealthy southern capital. And finally, a cross-territory industrial chain to turn raw materials into high-profit finished goods. The lords were mesmerized. They could practically hear the clinking of gold coins. Benjamin then added a final, crucial layer, an intelligence-sharing network to track trade prices and potential threats. Baron Guise considered this, his thick fingers drumming a rhythmic beat on the table. "Sure," Guise growled. "Better to be informed than deaf and blind." With the alliance sealed, the meeting adjourned. But as the others huddled around Erwin, Baron Guise pulled Benjamin aside to the terrace. Below them, the disciplined tents of the Frosttown soldiers stood in neat rows. "Your soldiers are good," Guise admitted, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly tone. "To be honest, seeing your strength makes me want to crush you before you rise too high." He let the threat hang in the air for a dramatic beat, then sighed. "But I won't. My wife is smarter than me, and she says cooperation is more profitable." Guise leaned in closer, offering a parting warning. While the Earl of Eagle's Nest was distracted by internal feuds, the Lord of Wolf's Mouth Fortress would not forget his captured son. "Watch your back, Blackwood," Guys warned, clapping him hard on the shoulder. "Consider that tip a gift for our new alliance." With that, the dangerous man strode away, leaving Benjamin alone in the cool evening air to contemplate the high stakes of the game they had just begun. As the last lord's carriage disappears down the road, Erwin Hawthorne's enthusiastic smile fades, replaced by a look of deep reflection. He turns to Benjamin Blackwood, his voice brimming with praise. "Lord Blackwood, we owe you a debt of gratitude. Those young men you brought, they were absolutely dumbfounded. Their little schemes are nothing in the face of true power." Benjamin remains humble, offering to take his leave to attend to his own territory, but Erwin insists. "Oh, why the rush? The banquet is prepared, and my daughter Lena wishes to thank you personally." Benjamin, seeing his tired soldiers, finally relents. That evening, the Hawthorne estate is a vision of traditional aristocratic luxury. Gilded tableware gleams under candlelight, and waitstaff move with silent, elegant precision. Lena Hawthorne is the picture of poise, her golden hair shimmering like sunlight as she offers Benjamin a grateful smile. The air is thick with melodious music, the aroma of exquisite mead, and the sweet laughter of beautiful women. It is a dreamlike paradise, and Benjamin feels his heavy eyelids begin to close. But just as intoxication takes hold, a chilling wind suddenly bites at the back of his neck. The cold is so sharp it shatters the golden haze. Benjamin jolts awake. He realizes this luxury, this comfort, it doesn't belong to him, it belongs to Silverbrook. His reality is a desolate, impoverished town crying out for rebirth. Suddenly, a tidal wave of responsibilities crashes over him: defensive fortifications, trade deals, and the urgent needs of his people. He makes a polite excuse and retreats to his room. There, in the flickering candlelight, he writes furiously in his notebook. "After drinking, I became even more eager to handle official business. Maybe I am cheap at heart." The next morning, Benjamin declines breakfast and leads his men home. Watching them depart, Erwin sighs to his daughter. "He reminds me of myself when I was young, full of urgency and ambition. I seem to have forgotten that quality." As the woody scent of Frosttown rises on the horizon, Benjamin feels a sense of peace. He is immediately met by his anxious administrator, Sullivan. Despite a throbbing hangover, Benjamin patiently outlines the new trade alliances. "The implementation is in your hands now, Sullivan. Get to work." Finally, Benjamin encounters Chesvia. She scoffs at the lingering scent of alcohol on his breath but hands him a cup of warm fruit tea. Benjamin takes a long, grateful gulp. He jokes about the fine mead he left behind, but Chesvia only rolls her eyes. "No matter how good it was," she says, "you still had to come back to my sour tea. Wake up, my lord, the fields won't grow on mead alone." Benjamin finishes his drink and smiles. "Yeah, I'm back." Benjamin stumbled along the newly cleared ridges of Frost Town, his head still throbbing from the previous night's festivities. The cold morning wind bit at his skin, but it couldn't quite wash away the lingering sweetness of mead. "Alcohol," he groaned, rubbing his temples, "it truly messes everything up." Chesvia glanced back, a smirk dancing on her lips. "It seems the mead from Silver Creek still has a hold on our boss," she mocked gently. "But look ahead, Benjamin, look at something substantial." She waved her arm, and suddenly a wave of invisible green light washed over him, clearing the fog from his mind. Benjamin gasped. The once barren, gravelly slopes had been transformed. Neat rows of vibrant green wheat seedlings now carpeted the earth like a thick, shimmering rug, with morning dew glistening like gold in the rising sun. I don't know what to say," Benjamin stammered, breathless. Chesvia crossed her arms, her voice ringing with quiet pride. "By the early summer harvest, this field will produce enough to feed 2,000 people." 2,000, that was more than the entire population of Frost Town. For the first time, they would be self-sufficient. Chesvia crouched down, her fingers parting the stalks to select a single, robust ear of wheat. As Benjamin watched, translucent threads of pure energy like living silk wound around her hand. This was her mind blade, but it wasn't a weapon of war, it was a force of creation. Before his very eyes, the green wheat turned a full, heavy golden ye. "Low, ripening in seconds." "Your power," Benjamin murmured, "it's amazing." "It's getting stronger," she admitted, her tone thoughtful. "I can influence the growth process more precisely now." Their wonder was interrupted by a booming voice. "Benjamin, Madam Minister, It was old Blackwood, Benjamin's father. He stood by a massive, sophisticated new water wheel, his bronze face beaming. This new design is incredible. It draws water faster than anything we've ever used. Benjamin turned to Chesvia, truly impressed. You are far better at this than I am. Chesvia lifted her chin, basking in the praise while feigning humility, already hinting at her next project, improving the winter survival of livestock. As they walked back toward the Agricultural Research Institute, the atmosphere was light until they reached the specimens of soil and parchment. Chesvia stopped, her turquoise eyes turning serious. Benjamin, she asked quietly, have you ever heard of the goddess of the spirit garden? Benjamin shook his head. No, some minor deity of the soil. Perhaps, Chesvia replied, her gaze fixed on the dried leaves. But what would you think if I told you that this goddess's church is right here near Frost Town? Benjamin did not immediately answer Chesvia's question about the temple of the goddess of the spirit garden. Instead, he looked at her in a heavy silence, his gaze shifting between her inquisitive gray eyes and the plant specimens scattered across the floor. He knew exactly why she had brought this up. In this world, gods are not mere myths, they are real. They respond to prayer and bestow the blade of thought, a supernatural power that turns ordinary mortals into chosen ones like Chesvia and Ella. Chesvia's suggestion was a test. Her eyes seemed to say, I have shown you the path, now weigh the risks yourself. After a long pause, Benjamin took a deep breath. Where exactly is this temple? He asked. Chesvia shrugged. I only heard a rumor from an old farmer. If you wish, I can call him in. Wait, Benjamin raised a hand, pacing the room like a strategist in a dilemma. It is not that simple. In Frosttown there can only be one voice, my voice. If we introduce a faith, the Lord's command must supersede any divine pronouncement. He grew agitated, gesturing wildly as if swinging a hammer. I will not have charlatans pointing fingers in the name of a god. If they interfere, I would have to tearfully smash the temple to pieces. He paused, his tone softening with uncertainty. However, most gods are well-behaved, unlike the temperamental pale goddess. If this spirit garden faith is gentle, focusing on farming and the soil, and if we hold the right to interpret its doctrine, then it could be an asset. He looked at Chesvia with a sharp glint in his eye. Fine, let us investigate. Soon, the peasant was brought before them. He was a man in his 30s with skin darkened by the sun and hands roughened by toil. Trembling, he told his story. His family had been starving, lost in the Grey Whisper Mountains when they stumbled upon a stone church. The people there were kind. They provided food, water, and shelter without forcing them to convert. He described the location, a ravine marked by a massive, ancient tree that looked dead but still stood tall. Once the farmer was dismissed, Benjamin turned to Chesvia, his expression wary. They sound almost too good. In the stories from my hometown, the church is always the villain, virtuous on the surface but plotting to overthrow the government in the shadows. Chesvia rolled her eyes at his dramatic flair. Ah yes, the far-sighted barren sees all, so shall we still visit this den of world-destroying demons? Benjamin coughed awkwardly, touching his nose. Yes, we go. We shall despise the enemy strategically, but take them seriously tactically. Prepare the guards, we head for the spirit garden. The messenger from Wolf's Mouth Valley arrived with desperate haste, as if the bitter cold of frostbite were a physical weight upon his shoulders. Knight York, a man of pride and martial skill, was led to the center of the settlement. There he found the rising Baron Benjamin Blackwood standing before a massive 3-story stone manor, its roof still open to the sky. Beside the Baron stood the grim-faced Knight Walter and 2 rows of 20 fully armed guards. Their silent, piercing stares made York's palms sweat. Steeling himself, York announced his arrival with formal knightly precision. Benjamin turned slowly, a serene yet enigmatic smile on his face. He did not acknowledge the messenger's purpose. Instead, he gestured to the unfinished building. Sir York, he asked casually, what do you think of my new manor? York hesitated. Compared to the ancient, ornate castle of the Viscount, this was a mere shell. But under the icy pressure of Walter's gaze and the silent threat of the guards, York's courage failed. He lowered his head in humiliation. It is more beautiful than the Viscount's, he choked out. Benjamin's hearty laughter rang through the air. He patted York's stiff shoulder and led the party into a temporary reception hall. There, York presented a handwritten letter from the Viscount. To York's shock, Benjamin didn't read it in private. He unfolded it for all to see, his administrator Sullivan, the Minister of Agriculture Chesvia, and even his young sister Marielle. The letter was an insult. It downplayed the kidnapping of a royal lord as a youthful impulse, and offered a measly 100 gold shields for the release of the Viscount's son, Cadden. The room erupted. Knight Walter slammed his fist on the table, roaring at the Viscount's audacity. Sullivan noted coldly that the Viscount clearly failed to grasp the Baron's strength, while Chesvia mockingly suggested feeding the prisoner leftover sheep bones. Finally, little Marielle pointed at York's ashen face, remarking how dark in anger. Why he looked. Pushed to his limit, York gripped his sword hilt and challenged Walter to a duel to defend his master's honor. Benjamin gave a lazy wave of his hand. Go ahead, Walter, just try not to kill him. The fight was brief. On the training field, Walter dismantled the enraged York with swift, brutal grappling. Minutes later, a bruised and battered York was dragged back into the hall, his arrogance shattered. Benjamin remained seated, watching the broken knight with calm composure. Now, Sir York, he said softly, shall we discuss a ransom, truly befitting the Viscount's mistake? Covered in dust and weary from the day's chaos, Benjamin stretched with a sense of hard-won satisfaction. He was just about to remark on the rare moment of peace, when a cool, sharp voice rang out behind him, cutting through the air like a bucket of ice water. Your Excellency, it doesn't seem like the time to rest yet. Benjamin didn't need to turn around. It was Evelyn, the newly appointed Minister of Intelligence. She stood beside him like a ghost, clutching a stack of fresh documents. Her expression was a mask of calm, but her eyes were sharp enough to pierce bone. Benjamin sighed, a hint of regret in his voice. He told her she had missed the best part, watching a knight from Wolf's Mouth Valley transform from arrogant to humble. Evelyn merely tilted her head, her eyes filled with pure confusion. To her, human drama was a distraction. She lived for clear intelligence and missions to be carried out. With a resigned groan, Benjamin took the papers. Work, work, he muttered, surrendering to the grind. Meanwhile, far away in Ironforge, Miss Ella was drowning in a different kind of unease. The rebellion had been crushed by Calvin's knights, but as the dust settled, Ella realized her situation had not improved. The mining guild treated her with a hollow, fake respect, while her decrees vanished into thin air the moment they left the castle. She felt bound by invisible chains in that cold, damp fortress. Fools, ungrateful wretches, she screamed, pacing her room and kicking at her expensive silk skirt. A knock at the door interrupted her spiral. Her elderly butler announced in his characteristically flat tone that the Baron of Frosttown had replied. Ella snatched the letter, her fingertips trembling against the rough paper. She locked herself in her bedroom, her heart pounding. She told herself she wasn't afraid of Benjamin's arrogance, but her shaking hands betrayed her. She tore open the wax seal and began to read. Immediately, her brow twitched. There were no polite greetings. No "how are you?" Benjamin had gone straight to the point in his messy handwriting, telling her point by point exactly what she should do. The word should pierced her pride like a needle. This was the man who used to wash her clothes and start her fires, and now he was instructing her. The contents only got worse. He suggested she apologize to miners. To men covered in coal dust and grime, he called it a necessary gesture. Ella trembled with rage, her cheeks flushing crimson. She wanted to burn the letter, to watch his insulting advice turn to ash. But then, a cold realization struck her. Frosttown, once a barren wasteland, was now thriving under Benjamin's rule. He was, perhaps, a tiny bit better at this than she was. That thought was a dagger to her heart. If she didn't change, she would become a joke. With a tragic expression, she slammed the letter onto her dressing table. She took several deep breaths, forced her back straight, and shouted for the butler. When he appeared, she spoke slowly, as if announcing a grand execution. She ordered him to invite the guild leaders to the castle to discuss industry matters. She ordered money to be set aside for clean water in the settlements, and the establishment of a medical point for the workers. With every word, Ella felt her old dignity being stripped away, yet beneath the shame she felt a strange, new sense of freedom. The chains were finally starting to loosen. The second messenger from the Viscount of Wolf's Mouth Valley arrived far sooner than expected, and his attitude had shifted entirely. The sight of the Knight of York returning bruised and battered, coupled with Benjamin's unwavering stance, had clearly struck a nerve. The new terms were remarkably respectful. Administrator Sullivan nodded in approval as he read the parchment. The ransom was substantial, 600 gold shields and collectibles worth another 300, a sum that would nearly bankrupt a typical viscount. Along with the gold came a formal non-aggression pact in compensation for the misunderstanding regarding young Master Cadden's stay. Benjamin glanced at the offer. In a crumbling kingdom, this was the best he could extract without driving the Viscount to desperation. "That's settled then," Benjamin declared. "Sullivan, take the gold, sign the agreement, and bring Cadden from the jail." Poor Master Cadden. After 2 weeks of cold cells and coarse bread, he was a shadow of his former self, greasy, matted, and reeking of a sour prison odor. He practically scrambled into the carriage, desperate to flee the hellish place of Frosttown. Benjamin watched him go, unmoved. He knew these papers were only as strong as his own power to enforce them, but for now, they bought peace. With the diplomatic crisis resolved, Benjamin immediately turned to his next objective, finding the mysterious Spirit Garden Church. He donned his travel gear and summoned his team: Chesvia, the plant expert; Jeffrey, a talkative soldier; Pietro, a silent veteran; and an old farmer to act as their guide. 5 people, 3 horses. Chesvia, though brilliant with herbs, was a novice rider. She sat awkwardly behind Benjamin, clinging tightly to his clothes as they left the town behind. At first, the spring air was fresh and the mood light. Chesvia pointed out Jen, Tian, and Silverleaf along the road with professional joy, but as they hit the rugged paths of the Grey Whisper Mountains, the charm vanished. The bumpy, gravel-strewn trail turned her legs to lead. "How much longer?" she groaned. "Half a day," the farmer replied. To distract her, Jeffrey told a series of truly terrible jokes. While Benjamin and Chesvia cringed at the punchlines, the stoic Pietro actually let out a rare, soft chuckle. The lighthearted bickering continued until they moved deeper into the mountains, where the atmosphere suddenly curdled. Pietro pulled his reins tight, his hand raised in a silent command. His eyes were fixed on a bend in the woods. "Sir," he whispered, "there are people ahead, coming this way." Instantly, the laughter died. Benjamin and Jeffrey reached for their steel, and the mountain path fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The shadows of the woods shifted, but it was not bandits who emerged. Instead, several farmers appeared, their faces etched with fear, their clothes in tatters. They led a skeletal ox pulling a dilapidated cart where 2 sallow-faced children sat huddled among meager belongings. Terrified by the sight of armed men, the old leader nearly collapsed in a bow. "Sirs, please," he stammered, we will make way at once." Benjamin gestured for his guards, Jeffrey and Pietro, to lower their weapons. He dismounted, softening his voice. "Don't be afraid, where have you come from?" The old man exhaled, though his head remained low. "From the western border, sir, the lords there, they fight constantly. Taxes one day, conscription the next. We heard of a place called Frost Town. They say the taxes are fair and a man can work for his bread." Benjamin nodded slowly. "Keep to this path for half a day until you hit the main road. That leads to Frost Town. Follow the rules and you will find a place there." As the refugees trudged away toward their only hope, Chesvia remounted her horse, her voice a low murmur. "The West is crumbling, Benjamin. How many groups does this make now?" Benjamin gazed toward the horizon, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps it has always been chaotic," he replied quietly, "and we are only now choosing to see it. Come, let us move on." The group followed their guide deeper into the Grey Whisper Mountains until the path vanished into weeds. There, blending into the very rock of the mountain, stood a small, secluded church of gray stone. Beside it, a massive oak tree stood in a state of haunting transition. Half its branches were withered and skeletal, yet the other half sprouted tenacious, vibrant green shoots. Benjamin pushed open the weathered wooden door. Inside, the air was cool and dim. A young man stood with his back to them, wiping a simple stone altar. When he turned, the air seemed to settle. He was strikingly handsome, with pale yellow hair, but it was his aura of absolute, unshakable peace that commanded the room. "May peace be with you," the stranger said, his voice like silk. "It is a rare treat to have guests." After introductions were made, the young man known as Aphrodite sat with them, his posture relaxed. Benjamin spoke plainly. "We have come to learn of your goddess and your doctrines." Aphrodite smiled faintly. "The goddess of the garden is an ancient deity. She does not govern the clamor of life, but rather the silence that follows it. We believe that the land and the soul both require rest to grow." He gestured toward the half-dead oak outside. "Rest is not the end, Benjamin. It is merely the cycle of reincarnation." Aphrodite's voice flowed through the silent church like a mountain spring, gentle and serene. He spoke of a new divine decree, to save the suffering without expectation and to spread the gospel without the stain of political power. The goddess, it seemed, was weary of deities who meddled in secular disputes. Benjamin blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it all. That's all," he asked. There were no harsh precepts, only a doctrine of harmlessness. Chesvia leaned in, nudging Benjamin with a smirk. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "No relief funds, no political meddling, and you can even add your own details. It's tailor-made for a control freak like you." Seizing the opportunity, Benjamin approached the young man. "Bishop Aphrodite," he began tentatively, "if I were to establish a temple in Frost Town, could we add specific guidelines, to help the people understand?" Aphrodite tilted his head, considering for a mere 3 seconds. "Sure," he replied calmly. "As long as I think it is okay, then it is fine." Benjamin was floored. Don't you need approval from higher clergy?" "I am the 12th bishop," Aphrodite explained, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "In the absence of higher guidance, the authority is mine." The realization hit Benjamin. This handsome young man, cleaning an altar alone in the wilderness, held significant power. He cut straight to the point, inviting the church to Frost Town to provide spiritual comfort and aid in medicine and agriculture. Aphrodite did not jump at the offer. He insisted on investigating the town first to ensure its atmosphere matched the goddess's requirement for tranquility. Benjamin's respect for the man grew, though the church itself seemed threadbare. Aside from Aphrodite, there was only one other member, a hunter currently out seeking a meal. The Pope. He had vanished on a pilgrimage years ago. To Benjamin, this lack of organization was perfect. It made the church easy to manage. As they prepared to leave, Aphrodite insisted they stay for lunch. "Please," he smiled, "admire my meticulously maintained garden while you wait." Behind the church lay a hidden paradise of vibrant roses, fiery red, enchanting blue, and snow white. Chesvia's eyes lit up, but when she mentioned turning the rare blue roses into profitable specimens, Aphrodite's smile froze. A heated debate erupted between the two over the sanctity of life versus practical value. Leaving them to their gardener's war, Benjamin and his companion Geoffrey headed to a nearby stream. There, they met the returning hunter and began plucking pheasants for the afternoon meal. Amidst the bubbling water and the distant sounds of bickering, a strange sense of peace settled over the mountain church. Lunch was a simple, hearty meal of mountain flavors. Benjamin and his companions sat before thick, toasted dark bread and a steaming pot of soup prepared by Chef Aphrodite. As Benjamin lifted his wooden bowl, he paused, caught by a subtle floral aroma drifting through the savory steam. Aphrodite smiled, sipping his own broth. He explained that he had added dried petals, rosemary, and a touch of homemade rose syrup to enhance the flavor and provide a calming effect. Benjamin took a sip. The combination was surprisingly harmonious. The floral notes neutralized the gamey rabbit and chicken, leaving a delicate aftertaste. Even Chesvia was intrigued, already wondering if these herbs could be cultivated in the cold soil of Frostshire. After the meal, Benjamin offered his help to the mountain bishop, but Aphrodite declined, noting that his home was self-sufficient. With a final farewell to the charismatic host, the group began their journey home. Back in Frosttown, the air was thick with the sound of hammers and saws. The 3-story stone manor stood majestic, nearly finished. Benjamin immediately diverted skilled workers to 2 urgent projects, the expansion of the blacksmith's foundry and the agricultural research institute Chesvia had long dreamed of. Meanwhile, experienced craftsmen from Silver Creek arrived, quickly adapting to Benjamin's new assembly line methods. The town center was transforming. Sturdy stone and wood houses were replacing damp mud huts. When the townspeople saw the large windows of the model homes, they worried about the winter cold until they heard of the built-in fireplaces. Sullivan, the Lord's trusted aide, announced a new housing policy. These homes weren't free, but they were accessible through loans, fair installments deducted from wages. For the townspeople and the newly arrived refugees, it was a godsend, a chance to own a home through honest labor. While construction thrived, a weary traveler named Diona reined in his horse on the outskirts of town. He was a young man with hawk-like eyes, sent by Lord Finn of the Greenwood to assist Benjamin. Diona had traveled for months, passing through war-torn lands and decadent cities. He was struck by the road beneath his hooves. It was smooth, solid, and better maintained than the kingdom's main thoroughfares. To invest in roads that do not directly generate tax, Diona mused, shows a man with a long-term plan. With a spark of genuine curiosity, he spurred his horse forward toward the town, ready to meet the young baron who was turning a wilderness into a home. Before the newly built gates of Frosttown, soldiers in studded leather armor stood with spears in hand, their eyes vigilantly scanning every traveler. When Diona approached, leading his horse and carrying a long, cloth-wrapped bundle, he immediately drew their suspicion. "Halt, stranger," a squad leader barked, stepping forward. "State your identity, your purpose, and what you are carrying." Diona lowered his hood to reveal a youthful face. "My name is Diona from Green River Territory," he replied calmly. "I come on the orders of my master, Lord Finn, to pay respects to Lord Benjamin Blackwood. These," he gestured to the bundle, "are my weapons. As a guard, they are my duty." The leader hesitated. Anything involving nobility was above his station. "Wait here," he commanded. "We must verify this." As Diona waited, he noted the town's unusual order. The walls were well maintained and the roads were remarkably clean, unlike any border town he had ever seen. Soon, a tall, imposing figure in gleaming half-plate armor strode toward him. The man's face was rugged, his aura that of a seasoned warrior. "Diona, the Twinspear General?" the man asked in a deep, resonant voice. Diona nodded. "Some call me that, and you are?" "Walter," the man replied with deliberate weight, "Minister of Military Affairs and the Champion Knight." Diona's eyes lit up with a genuine smile. "So, we shall be colleagues. It is a pleasure, Knight Walter." Walter let out a soft snort, seemingly caught off guard by the young man's lack of intimidation. "Don't speak too soon," Walter muttered. "Follow me." As they entered Frosttown, Diona's eyes widened. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust and sweat. Workers were everywhere, chanting slogans as they raised stone and wood houses with organized professional tools. It was a scene of frantic, methodical growth. They reached the town center, stopping before a grand three-story stone building. A wooden plaque hung above the door, reading, "Frosttown Government Affairs Center." Suddenly, a woman's voice boomed from inside. "The noise is driving us crazy. How is the Ministry of Agriculture supposed to work in this racket?" A man's voice tried to soothe her, only to be interrupted by a massive asterisk crash from the construction site outside. The ground trembled. Inside the office, something overturned. "My ink!" the man screamed in sudden fury. "My budget drafts, they are ruined. Everything is black." A third voice, weary and battered, sighed. "Please, everyone, be tolerant. For a better future, we must make sacrifices." Walter pushed the door open. Inside, Diona saw a young man with heavy dark circles under his eyes, looking utterly exhausted. This was Lord Benjamin. Benjamin looked up, forcing a tired smile. "Ah, you've arrived. Welcome to Frosttown, Diona." Diona looked at the chaotic, ink-stained room and the sleep-deprived lord. He realized then, his new life was going to be very interesting indeed. He bowed deeply. "I am at your service, Lord Blackwood." The first-floor lobby of the new administrative center was a scene of absolute chaos. Bright lights spilled over a long wooden table cluttered with maps, slates, and a half-eaten breakfast of cold oatmeal and pickles. Benjamin sat behind the mess, his face etched with weariness as he offered a formal smile to the newcomer. "Diona, welcome to Frosttown," Benjamin sighed. "My apologies for the less-than-formal setting. The center isn't quite finished yet." Chesvia, the Minister of Agriculture, didn't even look up from her crop rotation records. "If it's so noisy and unfinished," she grumbled, "why rush to move in? The old baron's mansion was much quieter." Benjamin rubbed his temples. "That's a memorial building now. Suleiman wanted a place to showcase our history. They've already started making a mess of it." Diona stood ramrod straight, feeling a surge of tension. This wasn't the grand audience he had expected. Nearby, Evelyn silently cleared away the cold breakfast, while Sullivan desperately tried to salvage ink-stained documents with a damp cloth. "Ahem," Benjamin cleared his throat. "Diona, Lord Finn trusts you. Tell me, what are your specialties?" Diona reported with military precision. Close protection, elite reconnaissance, and rapid strikes in complex terrain. I am a master of dual pistols and hand-to-hand combat. Chesvia finally looked up, her gray eyes darting toward Walter, the military commander. Sounds a bit overlapping with Minister Walter's role, doesn't it? Overlap? Walter's voice exploded. He stepped forward, his face darkening. My lord, I have commanded phalanxes of over 100 men in border battles. I plan the overall defense. This is entirely different from individual raids and bravery. Benjamin quickly raised his hands. All right, you complement each other. Walter is our cornerstone. Diona brings special operations experience. He turned back to Diona. And your requirements for salary? Normal supplies are sufficient, Diona replied calmly. Few places are poorer than the Green River Guerrilla. Benjamin nodded, making his decision. Diona, you will serve as Walter's deputy for now to learn the terrain. Walter, take him to settle in. As the two men left, the room fell quiet until the screech of a saw and the heavy thud of construction echoed through the walls. Benjamin slumped, staring at a hole in the ceiling where a beam of light revealed the dust. It's so noisy, he muttered in despair. I forgot, sound insulation in this era, it simply doesn't exist. As the last rays of the setting sun vanished behind the Grey Whisper Mountains, the relentless din of construction in Frostbite Town finally ebbed away. On the site, workers lingered with torches, eager to earn a few more coins for their families. But the order from Benjamin was absolute. Go home, anyone caught king by lamplight will have their wages docked. Reluctantly, the men dispersed into the flickering lights of the town. Benjamin let out a long, weary sigh. He retreated to his third-floor bedroom, the only habitable corner of the new mansion, where he ate a simple dinner and took a long, hot bath. On his way to bed, he stopped by his sister Mary's room, smiling as she chattered about her great achievements helping at the memorial building. Finally, he could rest. He collapsed onto the soft mattress, his eyes stinging with exhaustion, but just as consciousness began to slip away, a cool, calm voice whispered directly into his ear. You still have a lot to take care of, you cannot rest now. Whoa! Benjamin bolted upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. There, standing like a ghost in the shadows, was Evelyn, his intelligence minister, clutching her ever-present notepad. She blinked with a feigned innocence that Benjamin knew all too well. Fine, you win, he muttered, rubbing his face. What is it? Evelyn's tone was flat. You wish to speak with the newcomer, Diona, regarding the situation at Green River. He is waiting outside. Moments later, Diona was ushered in. The man stood with military precision, his eyes clear and alert. He spoke enthusiastically about the town's morning exercise routines, but Benjamin quickly cut him off. He didn't want to think about sore muscles at midnight. Instead, he steered the conversation toward Lord Finn and the troubles at Green River. As Diona spoke, the gravity of the situation became clear. Green River was fertile and beautiful, yes, but it was a nightmare to govern. It sat on the front lines of a racial war. To the south were the ancient, hostile elves, to the mountains the fierce orc tribes. It was an endless cycle of raids, kidnappings, and fire. If not for Lord Finn's decisive guerrilla tactics, Diona said grimly, the territory would already be lost to elven flags and orc totems. Benjamin listened in stunned silence. He had thought his own struggles in Frostbite were difficult, but compared to Finn's constant, systematic warfare, his life seemed easy. This is really, Benjamin rubbed his temples, feeling his dark circles deepen. This is hellish. The oil lamp crackled in the silence of the study, casting long shadows across Benjamin's solemn face. After hearing Diona's harrowing report of the hellish conditions at Green River, the weight of the situation settled heavily upon him. This was no longer a matter of simple governance. It was a struggle for survival. Benjamin stood, pacing the room before turning to Diona with a sharp, focused gaze. The situation is 10 times more severe than I imagined, he admitted. Conventional strategies are useless when a sword is at your throat. He moved to his desk, the quills scratching urgently against parchment as he outlined a desperate plan. First, he commanded, shift everything to a wartime footing. Forget Expo. RTS, every artisan must produce weapons and armor. Every village must become a fortress of traps and trenches. You must turn Green River into a thorny thicket, so that every invasion pays a bloody price. He didn't stop there. Benjamin urged Diona to cast aside knightly pride and play the victim to the capital. They needed to flood the kingdom with reports of elven and orc atrocities, not to beg but to shame the neutral nobles into providing support. Cry poor, plead for justice, and express loyalty, Benjamin advised. Make those who wish to stab you in the back think twice. As Diona departed to send the message by carrier pigeon, a far greater storm was already erupting in the frozen north. In Pearl City, Lady Hill stared at a deciphered code that turned her blood to ice. Crown Prince Arkia had made a devil's bargain with the Northern Duke, offering total autonomy in exchange for the throne. Worse yet, the elite White Wolf Legion was already on the move. Hill's warning reached Princess Celia in the capital just as she was finishing a cup of tea. The porcelain shattered against the floor as she read the news. The kingdom's sharpest blade was now pointed at her heart. Celia struck back immediately, denouncing Arkia's treachery before the noble council. But as she descended the parliament steps, a poisoned crossbow bolt hissed through the air. With lightning reflexes, Celia spun, catching the arrow mid-flight and snapping the steel shaft with her bare hands. The failed assassination ignited the city, but Arkia's true move was even more ruthless. 3 days later, his banner was raised over the Iron Gate fortress. He had seized the military heart of the West, and the civil war for the kingdom had officially begun. "Kids, this isn't fun." Benjamin's opening remark to his core council, crammed into the temporary government center, signaled the end of their peaceful era of construction. The news had arrived like a carrion crow, fluttering into the remote town of Frostbite on a breeze of blood and fear. On Benjamin's desk lay dozens of letters from across the country. Most were from minor lords and knights, filled with veiled threats and probes about the coming war. One secret letter from Lord Elwyn Hawthorne of Silverbrook stood out. The seasoned merchant was uncharacteristically panicked, trade routes were being severed, and opportunists were flocking to the crown prince. A storm was brewing, and Silverbrook and Frostbite were caught in its path. Benjamin surveyed his grim-faced advisors, Administrator Sullivan, Minister of War Walter, Minister of Agriculture Chesvia, and the silent intelligence chief, Evelyn. He laid out the brutal reality. Iron Gate Fortress had fallen, Prince Alcia had declared civil war, and the kingdom was fracturing. The room erupted into a chaotic marketplace of voices. Sullivan demanded immediate diplomacy with neighboring lords to secure trade. Walter's booming voice drowned him out, calling for a total state of combat readiness, expanding the army, reinforcing the Greywhisper mountain passes, and stockpiling medicine and steel. Enough, Benjamin slammed his hand on the table, the thud silencing the room. He walked to the map, pointing sharply at their location. "We are not the capital," he reminded them. "No major army will cross mountains to attack a resource-poor border town yet. Our real enemies are the aftermath, price hikes, refugees, and opportunistic neighbors." He began issuing rapid-fire orders. Walter was to increase patrols and build watchtowers. Evelyn was to monitor the Viscount of Wolf's Mouth Valley for any movement. Sullivan was tasked with diplomatic outreach and preventing merchants from hoarding salt and grain. Just as a plan formed, Chesvia spoke up, her voice a cold needle of truth. She warned that while they prepared for battle, their development, the foundries, the research, the very soul of Frostbite could wither in the shadow of fear. Benjamin met her gaze and nodded slowly. The challenge was no longer just surviving the sword, but finding a way to keep the heart of the territory beating in the suffocating grip of a long, dark winter. Frosttown's response to the looming threat of war exceeded every expectation. It wasn't because the system was perfect, but because the young Lord Benjamin had spent the last year building an instinctive, unshakable trust through fair taxes and honest leadership. When terrifying words like rebellion and turmoil reached the streets, the people didn't panic. Instead, they looked toward the 3-story Government Affairs Center. A single phrase became the town's ultimate tranquilizer, the Baron said. The mobilization was swift. Under Minister Walter, the regular army, once a ragtag group of refugees and farmers, inspected their leather armor with a quiet, hungry excitement. For them, protecting Frosttown meant protecting their own lives. In the town square, the militia dropped their hoes and seized spears, expanding patrols into the mountain passes. The efficiency of the workers was nothing short of magical. Within 24 hours, construction teams used massive logs and rammed earth to erect sturdy watchtowers atop key heights. These towers were equipped with a new visual signaling system, using damp wood for smoke and colored flags to illuminate the edges of the gray whispering mountains. Meanwhile, the silent minister Evelyn activated her gray sparrows. Her network of tavern waiters and merchants vanished into the shadows to monitor the borders and trade routes. She even recruited local hunters, men who knew every hidden fold of the mountains, to serve as an invisible outermost barrier. Sullivan, acting as the administrative heart of the town, worked at full speed. He organized a census of every grain of salt and bar of iron. A wartime special material control order was posted, ensuring that while the Lord's mansion could requisition supplies, it wowl. D always be at a fair market price. This prevented black markets and kept the peace. The town transitioned seamlessly from construction to defense. The blacksmith's hammers clanged day and night, producing spearheads, while women baked durable rations in communal ovens. Even the children knew where to hide if the warning bells rang. Frosttown, once a loose collection of miners and refugees, was now a unified machine. At the center of it all, the lights of the administrative building burned late into the night, where a young lord with dark circles under his eyes continued to forge a future out of the coming storm. The moment the final report on the beacon towers reached Benjamin's desk, he didn't pause to celebrate. Frosttown's defenses were active, but the next phase of his plan was already in motion. He immediately summoned his administrator, Sullivan. The man looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes from nights of inventorying supplies, but Benjamin offered no rest. "Sullivan," Benjamin said, pushing a sealed parchment across the desk, "go to Silverstream immediately and meet Lord Elwyn." His tone was absolute. He explained that crisis is merely an opportunity for profit. Elwyn was to use his commercial network to stockpile grain, medicine, and leather, buying low from panicked lords to sell high once the war began. Benjamin's vision was cold and pragmatic: sell to all parties, regardless of their flag, and use the profits to fund Frosttown's iron and food reserves. Sullivan's weariness vanished, replaced by a hungry gleam of ambition. He nodded vigorously and set off to secure the gold shields Benjamin so desperately needed. Benjamin did not linger. He quickly changed into riding gear and signaled his guard, Diona. "We are going to Blackrock territory," Benjamin declared, mounting his warhorse, "to see Baron Guise." Diona's face paled. "My lord, Blackrock belongs to the Western Territory. The Grand Duke there leans toward the First Prince. This is a trap." As they galloped down the paved road, Benjamin remained calm. He explained the internal fractures of the West, how Baron Guise owed his loyalty to the ancient Dragonflame family, not the current Grand Duke. "Guise is no fool," Benjamin shouted over the whistling wind. "He won't risk a conflict with a strong neighbor for an unstable master." Within half a day, the dark, somber silhouette of Blackrock Castle loomed ahead. The atmosphere was cold, patrolling soldiers everywhere, yet the guards did not ask Benjamin to disarm. Inside the dim, charcoal-scented hall, Baron Guise sat by a roaring fireplace, his wife, Lady Alina, at his side. "You've got nerve, Blackwood," Guise sneered, his voice echoing against the stone, "coming here with only one soldier." Diona's hand flew to his pistols as a tangible chill filled the room, but Benjamin firmly pressed his arm down, signaling him to stop. Benjamin stepped forward, his eyes locked onto the Baroness. "Let's skip the formalities. Guys, get straight to the point." Guise let out a sharp, gravelly laugh and leaned forward, his gaze sharpening like a hawk. "I like your style," the Baron whispered. "Count Dragonflame wishes to meet you." Benjamin Blackwood had already been dissecting the internal power struggles of the West on his journey. He knew the Earl of Dragonflame, an old guard power suppressed by the Grand Duke, harbored deep-seated resentment. Now, that very Earl was reaching out through Baron Gus. Benjamin masked his calculations with a look of humble bewilderment. "The Earl wants to see me," he asked. "I am but a lowly baron. How could he even know my name?" Gus grinned like a wolf eyeing its prey. "I mentioned you," he admitted bluntly. "Otherwise, the Earl wouldn't waste time on a handyman baron from the borderlands." The insult stung. Diona, Benjamin's bodyguard, stepped forward, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. "Show the proper respect," he commanded. Gus merely sneered at the young man's impulsiveness before Benjamin subtly shielded Diona, cutting through the posturing. "Speak plainly, Gus. What does the Earl want?" "He wants to bring you under his wing," Gus replied. He explained that the Earl admired Benjamin's commune and his modern methods of motivating peasants, but more importantly, there was a strategic threat. Grand Duke Charles, the Earl's rival, was preparing his vanguard to cross the Greywhisper Mountains to curry favor with Prince Alkia. The Earl's goal was clear. He wanted to sabotage the Grand Duke without openly defying the crown. So, Benjamin surmised, the Earl wants me to block the Grand Duke's path. It is easier talking to smart people, Gus chuckled. He offered a deal. If Benjamin's forces at Frosttown and Silverstream acted as a shield, the Earl would covertly provide weapons, food, and vital intelligence. It was a godsend. Benjamin was already allied with Princess Celia, and a clash with the Grand Duke was inevitable. This deal provided the resources he desperately needed. However, one doubt remained. Benjamin leaned in. What of our neighbors, Ash Marsh and Stonebridge? If they stab us in the back, we are lost. Gus leaned back, a ferocious, confident smile stretching across his face. You can rest assured, he said slowly. They won't cause any trouble because they belong to me. The chill in the room deepened. Gus had already moved to annex the neighboring territories. The board was set. Benjamin met the Baron's gaze and nodded solemnly. Tell the Earl, the Grey Whisper Mountains are the gateway to our home. We will not let outsiders pass. The meal was hearty and undeniably primal. Large chunks of roasted venison, still bloody at the center, sat alongside hard black bread and potent, spicy ale. Baron Guys kept the atmosphere light, trading border anecdotes and debating the merits of dual pistols in woodland warfare with Diona. Even the quiet Lady Alina commanded the room, hers. Sharp insights on resource management, making Benjamin take mental notes. Once the meal concluded, Benjamin didn't linger. He finalized supply arrangements with Gus and coordinated a liaison for Sullivan before departing for Frosttown. As dusk fell, the rhythmic echo of hooves filled the evening air. Diona finally broke the silence, her voice clear in the breeze. My lord, isn't allying with Baron Guys and Earl Dragonflame too risky? They are nobles of the West, not allies of the princess. Isn't this betrayal? Benjamin stared ahead until the distant lights of Frosttown flickered on the horizon. Diona, he said slowly, on a land about to be consumed by war, the first priority isn't loyalty, it is survival. The princess has been kind, but she is miles away, facing her own pressures. She cannot give us a single grain of food. If the Grand Duke's army marches through these mountains, we will be the first to be crushed. What use is our loyalty then, if we are nothing but an insignificant dot erased from the map? He turned to her, his voice firm. This is strategy, not betrayal. By blocking the vanguard, we protect ourselves and indirectly aid the princess by stalling her enemies. We gain experience, supplies, and strength. We are becoming a significant piece on the board, rather than a pawn to be sacrificed. He paused, his eyes narrowing. But we must be vigilant. We are dealing with a tiger. We keep our core forces in our own hands, and we bring Silver Creek into the fold so we do not stand alone. Diona nodded, the heavy reality of his words sinking in. I understand, sir. I will protect you and Frosttown. Good, Benjamin replied, patting her shoulder. Now we must convince that old miser Erwin that funding our war is cheaper than being robbed by the enemy. They returned to the government building after midnight. Inside, Evelyn waited with intelligence reports. Sullivan was still away, but the watchtowers were operational. Benjamin reviewed Chesvia's notes on food reserves before drafting a forceful letter to Erwin, hinting at their new, powerful Western allies. Exhausted but wired, Benjamin walked to the window. Below, the town was quiet, save for the rhythmic torches of patrolling guards. Frosttown was no longer a helpless village, it was a hedgehog raising its quills against the dark. Diplomacy, military, domestic affairs, he muttered with a bitter, excited smile. You really think highly of me. Turning back to his desk, he unfolded the map of the Grey Whisper Mountains. By the dim light of the oil lamp, he began marking every pass and valley, turning a desperate defense into a calculated war for survival. As the first light of dawn touched the mist-shrouded streets of Frosttown, the thunder of hoofbeats broke the silence. Administrator Sullivan, weary and windswept, galloped through the gates and rushed into Benjamin's office. Benjamin, still shaking off the exhaustion of an all-night vigil, as Sullivan dropped a heavy stack of documents onto the table. Mission accomplished, sir, Sullivan reported, his voice thick with excitement. He described how he had cornered Lord Elwyn of Silver Creek, painting a terrifying picture of the coming war. He convinced the merchant lord that if the western frontier forces marched east, they wouldn't stop for a peace sign, they would plunder everything the Hawthorne family owned. To prove his success, Sullivan signaled his guards to bring in a heavy, iron-inlaid wooden box. As the lid creaked open, the dim room was suddenly illuminated by the golden glow of 500 gold shields. This was the first phase of a security fund for rations, iron, and medicine. More importantly, Elwyn had signed a formal cooperation agreement, granting Frosttown access to his vast trade network and even authorizing the secret use of merchant guards to protect supply lines. Benjamin's first genuine smile in days spread across his face. "Well done, Sullivan, you've done a tremendous service." But there was no time for rest. Benjamin immediately tasked Sullivan with a new mission, acting as the liaison to Lady Alina in Blackrock territory to coordinate intelligence and arms supplies. By noon, the atmosphere in the government center turned somber. Benjamin gathered his core council and delivered the chilling news. The vanguard of Grand Duke Charles was expected to strike through the Grey Whisper Mountains, using Frosttown as a target. "We are not unprepared," Benjamin declared, his voice cutting through the rising panic. He began issuing rapid-fire orders. Walter was commanded to lead the militia in building 2 lines of fortifications, ensuring the battle never reached the town walls. Diona was appointed leader of a new mountain rapid reaction force, a unit of elite daggers meant to harass the enemy's flanks. Evelyn was tasked with deep intelligence, while Sullivan managed the logistics of the 2 allied territories. As the meeting dispersed, Chesvia approached with a final, vital concern: the vulnerability of their crops. Benjamin approved her plan to establish secret backup granaries in hidden mountain valleys, ensuring the town wouldn't starve if the main fields were burned. Left alone, Benjamin looked out toward the majestic, silent peaks of the Grey Whisper Mountains. A storm was brewing, and no matter the cost, they would have to persevere. In the cold, damp halls of Ironhold, Ella felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. The kingdom was fracturing, and the news of Prince Archia's rebellion pierced the air like a winter chill. Fear simmered in the mines and taverns alike. The people whispered, would they be purged for their loyalty to Princess Celia? This panic erased every small gain Ella had made. She had tried to follow Benjamin's advice. She really had. She met with the guilds, she repaired the public wells, but then disaster struck. A local quack hired to help the miners managed to bloodlet 4 men to death. The town nearly revolted. It was only after Ella personally saw the doctor hanged that the fury subsided. "Useless," she screamed, smashing vases against the stone walls. "All of them useless." To make matters worse, the mining guild foxes were now whispering of betrayal, suggesting she submit to the prince. Ella exploded. Forgetting all etiquette, she had the lead agitator dragged out and given 30 lashes. The screams echoed, but they brought her no peace. She felt powerless, until a letter arrived from that annoying Baron of Frosttown, Benjamin. She tore it open, expecting a lecture. Instead, she found a lifeline. "Do not panic," he wrote. He explained that Ironforge was strategically safe, shielded by the stubborn Lord Calvin. He proposed a plan: turn the iron mines into a gold mine by forging weapons for the coming war. He had already secured trade routes with Silverstream. Ella's heart pounded. This wasn't just survival, it was influence. But it was the end of the letter that truly changed her mood. Benjamin had included complex drawings, intricate gears, and cylinders that no ordinary smith could forge. "Only you can do this," he wrote. "This is not blacksmithing, it is a work of art, a unique creation that only your blade of thought can bring to life. Artwork priceless, only her." The vanity Ella had guarded so fiercely was finally satisfied. A smug, bright smile crossed her face. "HMPH, you do have some taste, Benjamin." She stood tall, her frustration replaced by a sudden, sharp purpose. She summoned her butler with a commanding shout. "Move the purest iron to my workshop, tell the guilds to start the new trade road immediately, and clear the castle," she added, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I have a masterpiece to create." While Ella prepares to showcase her artistry in Ironforge, a secret meeting in the Grey Whisper Mountains has yielded a deadly harvest. In a secluded valley, Suleiman meets with Lady Alina of Blackrock territory to oversee a massive handover of war supplies. As the waterproof tarpaulins are lifted, the sheer scale of the aid is breathtaking. 10 sets of gleaming plate armor, 40 finely crafted crossbows, and thousands of bolts. But the true prizes are 2 massive, heavy ballistae. These behemoths of dark hardwood and cold metal exude a chilling sense of oppression. Lady Alina, trading her regal gowns for practical hunting attire, pats a metal winch and warns that these are spears of death, capable of pinning knights to the ground and shattering enemy morale. When these war machines are finally hauled into Frosttown, the veteran knight Walter is mesmerized, caressing the gears like a lover. To Benjamin, these gifts from Earl Dragonflame are more than just weapons, they are a silent demand for results. Meanwhile, at the castle of Wolf's Mouth Valley, a very different atmosphere takes hold, the Viscount still stinging from his previous humiliations is now obsequiously serving wine to Knight Karen, a stern commander representing the Grand Duke of the West. Karen has arrived with 500 elite soldiers and a singular goal, to clear a path for Prince Alchia's eastward expedition. As they study the maps, Karen identifies Silverstream and Ironforge as their primary targets for plunder and strategic positioning. However, his finger stops on an inconspicuous mark, Frosttown. The Viscount immediately begins to vent his rage against Benjamin, but Karen waves him off with cold indifference. To the Knight Commander, time is more precious than gold, and a siege is a nuisance he wishes to avoid. With a contemptuous smile, Karen orders an adjutant to send a messenger to the Baron of Menial Tasks. The ultimatum is simple: surrender, offer provisions, and swear allegiance to the prince, or be utterly annihilated. In Karen's mind, Frosttown is merely an ant to be crushed, and he expects the handsome Baron to kneel in terror the moment the Grand Duke's seal is revealed. The squire sent by Knight Karen strode into the Grey Whisper Mountains with an air of unearned superiority. Dressed in a respectable coat and clutching a document bearing the Grand Duke's seal, he imagined the handmaid Baron trembling at his arrival. Reality, however, was far less welcoming. Before he could even glimpse the spires of Frost Town, agile figures in camouflage emerged from the rocks like ghosts. Without a word, they disarmed him, blindfolded him, and hauled him away like common cargo. When the blindfold was finally ripped away, the envoy found himself in a dim, wooden room. Before him stood Benjamin, a young lord with dark circles under his eyes, and a cold-eyed warrior clutching a cloth-wrapped blade. The envoy cleared his throat, desperate to regain his dignity, but before he could utter a single formal greeting, Benjamin interrupted with a casual shrug. "You must be tired," the Baron said. "Walter, get this gentleman a chair." The burly knight Walter didn't bring a chair. He dropped a rough, jagged tree stump in the center of the room, a seat so low the envoy was forced to crouch, looking up at his captors in a position of blatant humiliation. "You're looking for this," Benjamin tossed the envoy's own sealed scroll onto his lap. The messenger stiffened, reading the demands with a trembling voice. Frosttown must open its roads, provide endless supplies to the Western Army, and betray Princess Celia to swear loyalty to the usurper, Prince Alchia. He ended with a sneer, threatening that if the Baron resisted, Frosttown would be destroyed, leaving not a single chicken or dog alive. Benjamin listened with a wandering gaze as if bored by the theater. When the envoy finished, Benjamin turned to his administrator, Sullivan. "Did you get all that, Knight Karen's shopping list?" Sullivan nodded, reciting a dry summary. "They want free passage, free food, and for us to commit treason. In exchange for a verbal promise that means absolutely nothing." "Ah," Benjamin sighed. "So, you want to eat my food, use my things, and attack my friends, and if you're in a good mood, you might leave me the scraps." The envoy turned scarlet. "You." Suddenly, Benjamin's tone shifted. His words became rapid-fire, sharp as a blade. "How many infantry? How many cavalry? What are your supply lines? Who commands the main force?" The envoy stammered that is a military secret. "See?" Benjamin shrugged, his voice dripping with mock disappointment. "No sincerity at all. You want us to risk everything, yet you won't even tell us if you have enough bread for tomorrow. This business is far too risky." With a wave of his hand, Benjamin ordered the envoy escorted to the border. As the messenger fled, he heard Benjamin's voice drifting from a high window, cold and calculated. "Sullivan, record this. The Western Duke has made unreasonable demands and issued threats against our sovereignty. Send copies to our allies. We shall use this to prove our loyalty to the princess." The envoy quickened his pace, fleeing the mountain pass, but as he disappeared, Benjamin's smile vanished. He turned to the shadows where the scout, Evelyn, waited. "Can you keep up?" he asked. Evelyn didn't speak. With a single nod, she vanished out the window, a silent shadow trailing the messenger back to the heart of the enemy camp. The messenger returned to the Western Grand Duke's camp, disheveled and trembling, to report his failure to Knight Karen. As he recounted being pinned to a tree like a rabbit and mocked by Benjamin Blackwood, the tent erupted. Officers slammed their fists, screaming for the blood of the borderland barbarians. But Karen sat in chilling silence. His fingers tapped the map 1, 2, 3. Before he silenced the room with a single look, he didn't see an insult, he saw a trap. "He is putting on an act," Karen whispered. He deduced that Benjamin was either bluffing to buy time or, more likely, provoking a rash assault to lure the Duke's army into a deadly ambush within the Grey Whisper Mountains. "In the face of absolute strength," Karen declared, his voice turning to ice, "these little tricks are insignificant." He immediately issued his ruthless orders. The main force would break camp at dawn to stage a massive, loud feint at the mountain pass, drawing the enemy's focus. Meanwhile, 2 elite teams of 30 climbers would bypass the defenses through the treacherous peaks to strike Frosttown from the rear. Their goal? Burn the granaries, slaughter the workshops, and sow pure chaos. As for the locals of Wolf's Mouth Valley, Karen dismissed them as mere cannon fodder to be sent ahead to trigger any hidden traps. "Speed is of the essence," he commanded. "Execute." But high above in the forest canopy, a pair of sharp eyes watched it all. Evelyn had followed the messenger back, hidden by the dense brush. She saw the sudden hift in the camp's rhythm, the sharpening of blades, the hitching of horses. The enemy was moving faster than anticipated. She couldn't wait for a full map. Scrawling the vital intelligence onto waterproof parchment, she sealed it into a copper tube. With a sharp whistle, a gray-brown hawk descended to her arm. "Quick," she whispered, stroking its feathers, "go home." The bird took flight, a silent black streak against the sky, carrying the warning that would decide the fate of Frosttown. The carrier Falcon, a streak of gray lightning, landed precisely on a third-floor windowsill of the Frosttown Government Center. Waiting, there was a member of the Gray Sparrow organization, a man disguised as an unassuming janitor. With practiced discretion, he removed a copper tube from the bird's leg and hurried toward the Lord's office. Inside, Benjamin was engaged in a battle simulation with Walter when the message arrived. He broke the wax seal, his expression darkening as he read Evelyn's concise, heavy report. The enemy's main force numbered over 600 well-equipped men, including at least 6 knights. They were the Grand Duke of the West's direct troops, an elite vanguard renowned for fierce combat. "Over 600 men," Benjamin whispered, a chill creeping up his spine. His own standing army numbered just over 100. Even with the militia, he could barely muster 300 souls. Worse yet, the kingdom's regular army was paralyzed by a power struggle for the throne. No help would be coming from the capital. For a moment, a wave of pessimism washed over him, a fleeting thought of fleeing with Celia. "Sir," Walter's steady voice broke the silence. The commander had already scanned the report. He walked to the map and pointed to a jagged mark on the eastern side of the Grey Whisper Mountains. "The enemy must target Stonetooth Pass. It is the only passage wide enough for wagons." Walter's tone was devoid of fear. He detailed his strategy: 3 lines of defense, pitfalls and archers to harass the vanguard, stone breastworks halfway up the mountain, and a final line at the narrowest point of the pass. Luring them into unfavorable terrain was always the plan, Walter said firmly. "I request to move the reserves and our 2 ballistae to the pass immediately." Benjamin took a deep breath, placing his full trust in his commander. "I entrust the defense to you, Walter. Be cautious. The enemy will have a backup plan." With a sharp military salute, Walter strode out, his heavy footsteps echoing with resolve. Benjamin immediately sat at his desk to write. He dispatched urgent letters to his allies, a plea to Irwin of Silverbrook to mobilize the merchant guards, a coded warning to Guys of Blackrock, and a message to Ella at Ironforge to hasten production of her work of art. As night fell, Benjamin looked out at the dark silhouette of the mountains. The air in Frosttown was solemn, but the torches of the patrols moved with rhythmic purpose. He clenched his fist, whispering to the darkness, "Stay calm, there is still so much to do." Walter stood upon the high ground behind Stonetooth Pass, looking down at the concrete fortifications that had miraculously sprung from the earth in just a few days. His confidence was absolute. It was a confidence rooted in his loyalty to Lord Benjamin Blackwood, his trust in his soldiers, and his own prowess as a master of martial arts. But as he watched the figures below, Walter realized the true source of his certainty. There, dressed in coarse cloth and covered in ash, were the workers of Frosttown, the engineering corps. Under Lord Benjamin's rule, every able-bodied resident had been transformed into a precision tool of war. Benjamin was a man of obsessions. He promised to fill his people's mouths with food, provided their hands were never idle. Before Walter's eyes, the defensive system was being printed into existence across 3 deadly layers. First, the frontal hysteresis zone. 1 kilometer out, the workers were finishing a stalagmite forest, thousands of diamond-shaped concrete stakes no higher than a man's calf. This field would force any charging cavalry to slow to a crawl, turning them into easy targets for the archers perched on the nearby concrete watchtowers. Second, the core blocking zone. This was the throat of the pass. A thick, angled concrete wall stood ready, lined with narrow firing holes to protect the crossbowmen within. 10 meters behind it rose a second, higher wall, creating a death corridor filled with camouflaged spikes and crossfire. Finally, the third layer, a massive, crescent-shaped wall guarded the road to Frosttown. It featured hidden troop caves to shield reserves and ammunition from enemy fire. Walter, a traditional knight raised on stories of glorious charges, felt his understanding of warfare shifting. This concrete ignored the limitations of stone and time. It didn't just provide cover, it fundamentally erased the possibility of a cavalry charge. "Baron," Walter murmured with genuine admiration, "you brought more than just seeds and houses. You brought a completely new way of fighting." He gripped the hilt of his sword, his eyes sharp. The graveyard was ready. Walter turned to his messenger, his voice deep and steady. "Order all commanding officers to enter final combat readiness. Check the traps, distribute the fuel, the enemy is coming, and we are ready to receive them." The army of Knight Karen established their camp on a sloping ridge 3 miles from the jagged maw of Stone Tooth Pass. Karen, a seasoned hunter of men, surveyed the narrow, winding passage with a cold, calculating gaze. He knew the cliffs were a natural altar for an ambush. "Set up sentries," Karen commanded, his voice like cracking ice, "and have the men from Wolf's Mouth Valley send a team to scout the throat of that pass." The order fell upon a retainer named Glenn. He knew exactly what this was. He and his 10 squires were being used as sacrificial lambs to spring any hidden traps. With a bitter curse, Glenn mounted his horse and led his men toward the dim shadows of the gorge. His caution was his salvation. 100 meters from the entrance, a sharp-eyed squire hissed, "My lord, the ground." Glenn dismounted, brushing aside fallen leaves to reveal a nightmare, a dense field of diamond-shaped concrete stakes, barely a foot high, gleaming like sharks' teeth. Had they charged, the horses would have been eviscerated. "A trap," Glenn signaled, "retreat, slowly." But the shadows spoke first, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Arrows erupted from the tree line. They weren't aimed at the armored Glenn, but at the unshielded legs of his servants and the flanks of their horses. Screams filled the air. Glenn's warhorse reared in agony as an arrow pierced its neck, throwing the knight violently into the field of stakes. The sharp tips pressed against his plate armor, a hair's breadth from skewering him alive. Bloodied and humiliated, Glenn crawled back to the main camp to report. Karen remained unimpressed. "Useless," the knight spat, "but informative." Karen immediately deployed a disciplined 60-man squad, a tortoise formation of heavy shields, followed by engineers with pickaxes and archers scanning the heights. They advanced with mechanical precision, chiseling away the concrete stakes under the safety of the shield wall. High above, in a camouflaged concrete watchtower, a soldier named Pietro watched the slow approach. He realized his archers couldn't pierce the shields. "Wait for a gap," Pietro whispered. "Aim for the ankles." Pietro loosed an armor-piercing shaft, but the enemy reacted instantly. "Raise shields," their commander roared. The arrow thudded harmlessly into oak. Seconds later, a retaliatory volley of 7 arrows hissed into Pietro's tower, forcing his men into the dirt. The message was clear. The invaders were not just numerous, they were professional. Pietro turned to his messenger, his face grim. "Go to the second line, tell them the stakes are falling. The real battle begins now." Petro's message traveled through a secret channel, reaching the throat of Stone Tooth Pass. Behind a sloping concrete wall, Walter watched the enemy's shield formation advance. He could hear the rhythmic chiseling of tools against the stone and the thinning whistle of resisting arrows. A messenger arrived, panting. "Sir, the first line is being breached. The enemy is efficient, their archers are quick, and our watchtowers are being suppressed." Walter nodded calmly. Order the first line to hold as long as possible, then retreat to the second line once the enemy is within 50 paces. Prioritize survival. Walter's gaze shifted to the death corridor, a lethal space between the front wall and a higher rear wall. His men were ready. Crossbowmen crouched behind narrow firing ports while archers wait. On the ramparts above, hidden teams were tucked into the flanking slopes, their lines of fire intersecting over the passage below. Tell Captain Diona to remain hidden, Walter commanded. No surprise attacks yet. Outside the pass, the enemy commander, Callan, received word of light resistance. He frowned. Light resistance, they are luring us in. He ordered a second assault team to follow the first, doubling the shield bearers. Watch the mountain walls for ambushes. The first assault team crossed the entrance. The air grew cold and dim under the towering rock walls. Suddenly they faced it, a low, grayish-white wall riddled with dark holes. Fortifications, the captain roared, form ranks. As the infantry approached with sledgehammers, a deep, grinding twang echoed from the wall. Buzz. 20 powerful crossbow bolts burst from the ports at point-blank range. Bang, 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 shields splintered. Men screamed as bolts pierced leather armor and bone. Nearly 10 men fell in the first salvo. The enemy tried to return fire, but their arrows bounced harmlessly off the slanted concrete. Retreat, the captain cried as a second volley erupted from different holes. When news reached Callan, his face darkened. A wall built right under your noses, he roared at a local knight. It wasn't there last month, the knight stammered. Callan's eyes flashed with ruthless intent. Order all teams forward, use the largest shields, carry ladders, firewood, and oil. I don't care about casualties, break that wall. A massive torrent of steel began to press toward the concrete barrier. Walter gripped his sword hilt, the cold stone steadying his resolve. The meat grinder was about to turn. Hold your ground, Walter's voice rang out. Archers, prepare fire arrows. Crossbowmen, switch to armor-piercing bolts. Prepare to meet the charge. Beyond the steel symphony of Stone Tooth Pass, a deathly silence gripped the gray Whisper Mountains. Diona knelt like a frozen statue in the shadow of a moss-covered boulder, his head tilted, listening to the very pulse of the earth. Around him, 15 scouts lay hidden, faces smeared with mud and ash, their eyes as sharp as mountain lynxes. I can sense them, Diona whispered. His voice was as soft as a rustling leaf, yet his knuckles whitened against the grips of his twin pistols. It wasn't a sound that alerted him, but a shift in the air, an intuition forged in the green hell of the Southern Territory. Check the markers, he commanded, eyes snapping open with predatory chill. Now. The team vanished into the brush. Diona's heart hammered. This damp canopy mirrored the rainforests of his past. The place where elven squirrel gang hunters had butchered his comrades from the shadows. He had promised Walter that the enemy would not only strike from the front. This was his chance to prove it. A scout blurred back into view, breathless. Sir, the snake path, the moss is trampled, fresh boot PR. At least 30 men heading for the town's rear. Diona didn't hesitate. Gather everyone, we move, now. They moved through the trackless wild, nimbly avoiding every snapping twig. 15 minutes later, Diona signaled a halt. Below them, on a narrow animal trail, 30 elite Western soldiers marched in silence. At their head rode a knight in gleaming plate armor. They were disciplined, but they were arrogant. They hadn't even glanced at the steep, impassable slopes above them. A sneak attack, Diona murmured to himself, is not the act of a knight. He ordered his men to fan out for a flanking volley, but he had a different plan for himself. He would not be a ghost today. He unslung his custom spears, weapons designed for the brutal reality of mountain warfare, and stepped out onto a protruding rock bathed in dappled sunlight. Clang! He struck his spearheads together. The metallic ring shattered the silence. 30 heads snapped upward in shock. Who goes there? The Western knight bellowed, hand flying to his sword. Diona stood tall, his aura surging. I am Diona, knight of House Blackwood. His voice echoed through the valley like a thunderclap. This road is closed. Invaders, state your names. He had offered a knight's challenge, the perfect distraction, before the forest behind them erupted into a bloodbath. Diona's entrance was so abrupt that the 30 elite warriors from the west felt only a surge of insulted rage. A lone youth, wielding a pair of strange spears, dared to block their path. Their leader, a knight named Harold, laughed in derision. Capture him alive, he roared, waving 4 veteran infantrymen forward to brush aside the arrogant roadblock. The four soldiers advanced in a semicircle, shields raised. But as the first man swung his sword, Diona's right-hand spear lashed out like a venomous snake, sweeping low in a silver arc that shattered the man's ankle. As the soldier fell, Diona spun like a top, his left spear slashing upward, tearing through the second man's throat. In a heartbeat, two were down. Diona leaped back with the grace of a mountain antelope, dodging a desperate strike from the third man before driving his spear through the edge of a raised shield and deep into the soldier's ribs. The fourth man turned to flee, but Diona's spear pinned his leg to the ground. The sneer on Sir Harold's face froze. "Archers, fire!" he screamed, but as the remaining 20 soldiers charged, a signal rang out, "Put." Suddenly, a volley of crossbow bolts and javelins hissed from the surrounding rocks. Diona's hidden team struck from the shadows, targeting the unshielded backs of the Westerners. Chaos erupted. Men collided in panic, their formation crumbling into a bloody mess. "Harold!" Diona's voice thundered over the screams. He charged like a hunting cheetah, his twin spears carving a path through the disoriented front line. He bypassed shields and parried blades with terrifying précision, leaving a trail of fallen men in his wake. Enraged, Harold lunged forward, his heavy plate armor clanking. He swung a massive longsword, but Diona was too nimble. The youth danced around the knight's clumsy strikes, probing for gaps in the steel. Harold tried to use brute force, but Diona slipped past him like an eel, hooking a stone with his foot to distract the knight before crossing his spears like scissors. The blades bit deep into Harold's unprotected thighs. The knight collapsed to his knees with a blood-curdling scream. Diona instantly pressed a spear tip to Harold's throat. "Your commander is captured," Diona shouted. "Surrender or die." Seeing their leader broken and bleeding, the surviving soldiers dropped their weapons. The ambush was a total success, an elite squad annihilated with 0 casualties. Diona glanced toward the distant sounds of war at Stone Tooth Pass and gave the final order: "Take the prisoners, evacuate, now." The thunderous sound of hooves echoed across the rugged mountain path. Diona lay prone on his horse, his face tense, his heart burning with rage. Behind him, the elite members of the Mountain Rapid Reaction Force galloped at full speed. During a brutal interrogation, the broken Knight Herald had revealed a chilling secret. There is another team taking the hidden path. Their target is Frosttown. The realization hit Diona like a physical blow. While he had intercepted one squad, a second flanking force was already slipping through the mountain barrier. If they reached the town, the entire defense would collapse. Quickly, Diona roared to his men, "Light the nearest beacon tower, highest alert." A soldier spurred his horse toward the hillside. Moments later, a thick, straight plume of black smoke shot into the sky, the highest emergency signal. Having sent the warning, Diona led his men in a frantic pursuit, tracking fresh prints in the dirt, praying they weren't too late. As they crested a hill near the outskirts of town, Diona abruptly reined in his horse. The anticipated battle was already over. A dozen corpses lay scattered across the road. Standing among them was a figure in light-studded leather armor holding a longsword dripping with fresh blood. It was the Lord, Benjamin. He was slowly pulling his blade from the neck of the enemy leader. "My lord," Diona stammered, dismounting in haste. Benjamin turned, a look of relief crossing his blood-stained face. "It is you. I thought you were reinforcements for these fools." Diona fell to one knee, his voice thick with shame. "My lord, I have failed in my duty. I allowed the enemy to reach you. Please punish me." But Benjamin reached out and pulled him up. "Diona, look at the sky." He pointed to the lingering black smoke. "If you had not lit that signal, the watchtower guards would not have been ready. You gave us the warning we needed to ambush them." Benjamin patted Diona's shoulder with a reassuring smile. "Guarding this territory is my duty too. I cannot drink wine in the back while you risk your lives. Now, return to the front lines. Walter needs you at Stone Tooth Pass." Diona felt a surge of admiration. He saluted sharply, mounted his horse, and thundered away toward the main battlefield. Behind him, Benjamin looked at the fallen knights and gave a cold order to his guards: "Clean this up, bury the bodies, but keep the heads and the armor. I do not want any more surprises." The air at Shia Pass was thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood. The first concrete wall had been breached, leaving a gaping hole littered with shattered stone and the corpses of fallen men. The western frontier's shield wall had broken through, but their celebration was short-lived. Before them stood a second wall, higher, thicker, and far more deadly. To reach it, the invaders had to funnel through a narrow, 30-meter passage, a path of death only wide enough for 6 men to walk abreast. The ground was a minefield of camouflaged spikes flanked by insurmountable cliffs. "Don't stop, charge!" a Western officer screamed from the rear. "Break the second wall." Driven by desperation, the Western soldiers howled, raising their shields as they poured into the trap. From behind the crenellations, Commander Walter watched with eyes as sharp as an eagle's. The fall of the first wall had been a ruse, a deliberate lure to draw the enemy into this preordained slaughter. "Archers, free fire!" Walter's voice was a low growl. "Crossbowmen, focus on the unshielded." A rain of steel descended, eliciting screams of agony. Yet the elite Western infantry pressed on, stepping over the bodies of their comrades to reach the base of the second wall. Sledgehammers began to thud against the stone. "Now," Walter whispered, a cold glint in his eyes. He signaled his messenger. "Ballistae ready." Behind the wall, camouflaged tarpaulins were ripped away to reveal 2 massive wooden behemoths. Their thick bowstrings were winched to the limit, holding arrows over 2 meters long, tipped with gleaming metal spears. Walter took a deep breath and roared, "Fire!" 2 earth-shattering booms erupted, the terrifying sound of giant strings snapping at the speed of sound. 2 blurry, black shadows tore through the air like dragons emerging from hell. The first massive arrow struck a heavily armored ranger, piercing his chainmail like paper and tearing through 4 more men behind him like bowling pins. The second arrow plowed a 10-meter-long scarlet trench through the crowd, smashing shields, bones, and bodies into a mangled pulp. A deathly silence fell. Time seemed to freeze. "A dragon!" someone screamed. "It's the breath of a giant dragon." The Western offensive crumbled instantly. Fear spread like a plague as soldiers trampled one another to flee the demonic wall. Walter drew his longsword, his voice echoing across the pass. "Open the side gates, Doctor." "I've them back." The Frostguard charged out like a pack of starving wolves, chasing the terrified invaders back through the breach. Shia Pass, forged of concrete, courage, and the sigh of death, had held firm. Outside Shia Pass, the western frontier camp was shrouded in a somber, suffocating gloom. Knight Karen stood by the flickering campfire, his face like stone as he stared at the battered remnants of his vanguard. The report was devastating: over 100 men lost, 80% of the Wolf's Mouth Valley soldiers slaughtered. The survivors spoke in terrified whispers of fire-breathing crossbows and invulnerable walls. Even worse, the 2 elite flanking squads had vanished without a trace. No signals, no scouts, nothing. "Useless, a bunch of useless trash," Karen roared, his fist splintering the wooden table. He didn't care about the lives lost, but he could not stomach this inexplicable defeat. Where did a mere border baron get the resources for such defenses? Was it the second princess, or something darker? He knew he couldn't wait. Pressure from the Grand Duke and the capital was mounting. Time was more precious than blood. "Assemble everyone," Karen's voice scraped like cold metal. "Move my direct troops to the front. Anyone who retreats will be executed. Load the fire arrows. Bring the siege hammers. We smash that wall and raise Frosttown by sunset tomorrow at any cost." The next morning, before the sun could even break the horizon, a killing intent hung heavy over the pass. Walter stood atop the second wall, his bloodshot eyes watching the dark mass of the Western army advance. This time there were no probes. It was a tidal wave of steel and fire. Burning rockets hissed through the air, and heavy shield infantry slammed into the concrete like iron hammers. Debris flew as axes bit into the wall. Siege ladders rose. The battle turned into a brutal meat grinder. Walter personally hurled boiling oil onto the climbers, their inhuman screams echoing through the chaos. "The ballista, aim for the center, fire," Walter commanded. The giant bolt whistled through the air, but then the impossible happened. Knight Karen leaped from behind his shields, roaring a battle cry. His body erupted with a visible, shimmering aura, the battle prayer of the goddess of mercy. With a titanic swing of his great axe, he struck the massive bolt midair, shattering it into 1,000 splinters. A stunned silence gripped the battlefield, followed by a thunderous cheer from the Western army. Morale in Frosttown plummeted. Even their strongest weapon couldn't touch the enemy commander. "Lord Walter, the men are breaking," Diona shouted over the din. But Walter didn't move. He watched Karen with terrifying intensity, noting the slight gasp after the divine burst, the rhythm of his breath, the gaps in his armor. "I know," Walter whispered, his knuckles white as he drew his chipped longsword. "I have seen right through you." In this sparied hour, the mortal knight prepared to challenge a god's power. "Fire again." Watt's voice rings out, unusually jarring amidst the deafening roar of the battlefield. He needs an opportunity. A single moment to force Karen to unleash that terrifying power once more, exposing a vulnerability. The massive arrows, trailing a sharp, piercing whistle, hurtled toward the densest area of the Western Frontier Army. "The same trick again," Callan roars. A golden light flashes in his eyes and an aura of compassion and valor erupts. His burly body moves with an agility that defies his size. His battle axe slices through the air, precisely intercepting the giant arrow. Clang! Another deafening explosion, the arrow shatters, but this time Callan visibly sways. His breathing becomes rapid, almost imperceptible, but it is there. Just as everyone's attention is drawn to the collision, Walter takes action. Without hesitation, he leaps from the 3-meter-high concrete wall. His heavy armor slams into the ground like a boulder with a dull thud. He rolls, absorbing the impact, and in one fluid motion his longsword flashes, taking the lives of 2 stunned soldiers. He straightens up, his blood-stained blade pointing at the earth. His gaze locks onto Callan. Walter takes a deep breath, and with a voice carrying an ancient sense of ritual, he bellows. "I, Walter, a knight under the Baron of Frosttown. In the name of knighthood, I hereby challenge you, the Knight of the West, to a duel. Do you dare to accept?" The battle knight duel, an ancient tradition. To refuse is more than cowardice, it is blasphemy. For one blessed by the goddess, fleeing a formal challenge could mean the dissipation of his divine power. Karen's face turns ugly as if he has swallowed a fly. He understands. This is a calculated conspiracy, an attack launched while his strength is flickering. "You know how to pick your timing," Karen spits through clenched teeth. "A knight as clever as you is a rare sight." Walter ignores the taunt. He has calculated everything. Karen needs 30 breaths to recover. He has 28 left. "We can't wait any longer." Walter launches himself forward like an arrow. Sword and axe clash, sparks flying as Walter's flawless technique puts Karen on the defensive. On the wall, Diona watches, mesmerized. Walter is a storm of precision. Thrust, parry, slash. He is winning. He is forcing Karen into a corner. The scales of victory tip. But then Karen stops. The anger vanishes from his face, replaced by a mocking calm. "Do you think," Karen whispers, his voice cutting through the chaos, "that without the goddess's power, I am just an old soldier to be toyed with?" Walter feels a chill run down his spine. "Everything you just saw," Karen sneers, raising his axe as a heavy, crushing pressure fills the air, "was just what I wanted you to see." Karen's aura burned with a final, desperate ferocity. He channeled the sea. Condensed power of the goddess of mercy into his massive battle axe, the air distorting under its weight. This was no feint, it was a mountain-splitting strike aimed directly at Walter. The axe descended with a thunderous boom, carving a deep trench into the hard rock. Dust and smoke engulfed the battlefield. Diona's heart leaped into his throat. The defenders stood ashen-faced, fearing their commander had been cleaved in two. But as the smoke cleared, Walter remained standing. The blade had missed his vitals by a finger's width, leaving a gruesome gash across his chest armor. Blood gushed from the wound, yet Walter felt a strange, uncanny lightness. His plate armor, once heavy, now felt like a second skin. He moved with a precision that defied logic, dodging Karen's desperate swings by the narrowest of margins. Karen panicked. He felt the divine grace receding like a tide. Walter seized the moment. He lunged into Karen's inner circle, reversing his grip on his longsword to use the heavy hilt as a warhammer. Thump! The blow dented Karen's helmet, sending the knight crashing to the dirt. Walter pinned him down, drawing a sharp armor-piercing spike. "My armor," Walter rasped, "was adjusted by my lord himself." He drove the spike into the gaps of Karen's plate, twisting until the Western knight fell silent. Victory was within reach, until a sharp thud broke the silence. A crossbow bolt fired by Karen's treacherous adjutant pierced Walter's side. Then came a swarm. Dozens of bolts hissed through the air like deadly bees, riddling Walter's frame. He staggered, his sword clattering to the ground as he collapsed. Lord Walter! The cry from the walls was a roar of pure, volcanic rage. Diona leaped from the battlements, leading a flood of Frostguard soldiers in a vengeful, blood-red charge. They didn't just fight, they slaughtered. Diona became a whirlwind of steel and lead, fueled by the sight of his fallen commander. The pursuit was brutal, ending only when the western remnants fled into the twilight. Diona stood amidst a sea of corpses, his breathing heavy and ragged. Slowly, he turned his head back toward the spot where Walter had fallen, the silence of the aftermath heavier than the battle itself. The door to the Government Affairs Center was flung open, and Jeffrey stormed in, covered in dust and reeking of blood. His face showed no joy of victory, only a deathly paleness. "My lord, Stone-Tooth Pass, Lord Walter." Jeffrey's voice was hoarse, barely able to form a sentence. Benjamin was checking supplies with Sullivan when he heard the noise. When he saw the stretcher covered with a blood-stained blanket, his heart sank, as if gripped by an invisible hand. "Explain yourself," Benjamin's voice rose sharply. "We won," Jeffrey gritted his teeth. "We repelled the Western Frontier Army and killed their commander, but Lord Walter, he was ambushed by their despicable crossbow bolts." Benjamin felt a chill show. Hot from his feet to his head, he staggered to the stretcher and lifted a corner of the blanket. His face turned as white as paper. The person lying there was no longer the champion knight he remembered. It was a body soaked in blood. Several crossbow bolt shafts still embedded in his chest like the quills of a hedgehog. Walter's breathing was so faint it was almost imperceptible. "The wounds are too deep," Jeffrey reported in a low voice. "The internal organs are, probably." The cruel realization overwhelmed Benjamin. He turned desperately to Chesvia, who had rushed over. "Chesvia, can you help me?" Chesvia looked at Benjamin's clenched fists. A complex emotion flashed in her gray eyes. She stepped forward and whispered, "That expression, we cannot let anyone outside see it, my lord." She paused, then spoke with solemn resolve. "Go do what you must. Leave this to me. I will help you. I will." Ignited by a faint flame of hope, Benjamin forced himself to suppress his emotions. He stood up and commanded Jeffrey to follow him. In the next room, Jeffrey gave a rapid report. "The enemy has not retreated. They are regrouping. Lord Diona has taken command, but morale is low, and our supplies are nearly gone." Benjamin listened quietly. The situation was more dangerous than he had anticipated. He immediately went to his desk and began writing to Lord Elwyn Hawthorne of Silverbrook. He reported the victory to reassure his ally, but then laid out the cold truth. Frosttown was on the verge of collapse. He requested an elite force to travel through the hidden mountain paths and launch a pincer movement. "The glory of victory will not be mine alone," he wrote. "Glory and spoils should be shared by all." He stamped the letter and handed it to a messenger. "Set off immediately." As the messenger sped away, Benjamin looked out into the darkness. Walter's fate was unknown and the defense was crumbling, but he could not retreat. "It's not over yet," he muttered, his eyes turning cold. "Silver Creek territory, do not let me down." "My lord, please reconsider." Sullivan practically blocked the entrance to the government center, his face a mask of raw anxiety. He spread his arms wide, desperate to stop Benjamin, who stood before him clad in light leather armor, ready for war. "On the battlefield, arrows are merciless." Sullivan's voice came in a rapid, desperate blur. "You are the soul of Frosttown, the hope of our people. If something happens to you, what becomes of this land?" He stepped closer, pleading. "Even if Stonefang Pass falls, we can retreat to the walls or the mountains. But if you go to the front lines and fall, we have nothing left." Benjamin stopped. He reached out, patting the administrator's shoulder, feeling the man's frantic pulse. "Sullivan, I understand," Benjamin said softly, "but we are standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind us is the abyss." He looked toward the horizon, the people's morale high. "Just on this battle, with Walter down, the soldiers need to see their lord standing with them, not hiding in safety. Without that trust, we are already lost." Without another word, Benjamin strode past him. Outside, 40 militiamen stood in formation alongside wagons of medicine and steel. Benjamin mounted his horse, looking back one last time. "This place is yours, Sullivan. Stabilize the rear, and, if I don't come back, you know what to do." He spurred his horse, the thunder of hooves shattering the dusk as they rode toward Stonefang Pass. Sullivan watched the dust settle, whispering to the empty air, "Why can't he understand? Only by living is anything possible." When Lord Benjamin finally appeared atop the battle-scarred walls of the pass, the silence was deafening. Exhausted veterans and young recruits alike stared in disbelief. Their lord wasn't just visiting, he had arrived at the very edge of the blade. Diona was the first to break the trance, saluting with a heavy hand to her chest. "My lord, you've arrived." The situation was grim. Morale was bottoming out and the ballistae had only 3 bolts left. Benjamin didn't interfere with the tactics. Instead, he became the signal. He ordered the men to fortify, set up sniper positions, and maintain a relentless watch. Over the following days, the Western Frontier Army sent small squads to probe the defenses. But every time a shield-bearer showed so much as a limb, Benjamin was there. He drew his longbow, his breath steady, the world narrowing to a single point. Whoosh! An arrow hissed through the air, finding the tiny gap between 2 shields and burying itself in a soldier's leg. As the enemy formation collapsed into chaos, cheers erupted from the Frosttown walls. Day after day, Benjamin's bow sang. He wasn't just a lord anymore, he was a marksman, a soldier, and a living promise that Frosttown would not fall. An almost palpable sense of oppression and anxiety hung over the Western Frontier military camp. The adjutant, now the acting commander, felt as if his head might burst from the sheer pressure. He was never meant for this. He was a mere coordinator, a man of inferior skill, now thrust into a disaster that would make him the laughingstock of the nobility for decades. His elite vanguard had been humiliated by a border baron with mud walls and ballistae. Worse, his commander Callan had been struck down in a duel. When Callan was rescued, his body was cold, practically dead. Without their commander's divine protection, how could they face that terrifying war machine in Frosttown? The adjutant's mind raced with cold-blooded desperation. Should he use the lives of his men to deplete the enemy's arrows? He knew the answer. If he even whispered such a suicidal order, he would be murdered in his tent by his own fearful officers before dawn. He could not advance, but he could not retreat. To return to Grand Duke Charles in failure meant a court-martial in Serda. In execution, he was a rat caught in a bellows, blocked on all sides on the verge of madness. His only lifeline was reinforcements. He had sent urgent mobilization orders to the neighboring towns of Ash Marsh and Stonebridge. He waited, he paced, he sent scouts every single day, but the report was always the same: no reinforcements in sight. "Damn those opportunists," he roared, slamming his fist onto the table. "Are they disobeying the Duke, or have they run into trouble?" Meanwhile, in the manor at Ash Marsh Town, the atmosphere was very different. The burly Baron of Blackrock, a man named Guess, sat in the Lord's high chair, covered in the dust and blood of a recent struggle. He held a crumpled letter, reading it aloud in a mocking, exaggerated drawl. At his feet, the elderly Baron of Ash Marsh trembled, held upright by 2 stony-faced soldiers. "To the Lords of Ash Marsh," Guess sneered, tossing the letter aside like a withered leaf. "The Grand Duke commands you to rush to the front, or be crushed to dust. My, what a grand display of power." Guess leaned in, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "Old man, I see you've already packed your provisions to join the Duke. Did you think our alliance was just a piece of paper? Did you think you could betray us?" The old Baron found a sliver of courage. "I was obeying the Grand Duke. Do you dare defy him? Aren't you afraid of his fury?" Guess stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow of pure terror. "What is Charles?" he spat. "A bootlicker who calls himself a duke. He does not command me." With a sudden, violent motion, Guess grabbed the old man's hair and slammed his head against the oak table. Thud. As the old Baron collapsed, bleeding and broken, Guess looked down with icy contempt. "Listen carefully. From today, Ash Marsh has a new master. Don't expect your duke to save you. You won't live to see it." The old man lay in the dirt, his heart filled with a final, desperate question. What kind of man is so fearless that he would commit such treason in broad daylight? Benjamin is a dreamer, but his dreams are a hodgepodge of fragmented memories. Sometimes he is back in a familiar classroom, hiding a comic book under his desk, only to be struck by a perfectly aimed piece of chalk. Other times he is a humble handyman for the heroic squad, polishing the armor of heroes like Cecilia and Finn or trading radishes for elven honey. But most often, he is a serf. In those dreams, the sky is a perpetual gray, the air reeks of manure, and the word tax is a leech sucking away his hope. Grown-ups. A low call pulls him from the quagmire. Benjamin bolts upright, his hand instantly gripping the longbow beside his pillow. "Where are the enemies?" he demands, his voice wary. At the tent entrance stands Diona, the dual-wielding general. "No, sir," Diona says with suppressed excitement. "A messenger from Silver Creek territory sneaked here under cover of darken. As he says he knows you." A thin, shrewd man steps into the light. It is Captain Kyle, the man who once helped Benjamin take down the mountain dog mercenaries. Benjamin exhales, a strained smile touching his weary face. "Captain Kyle, I am even happier to see you now than the first time." Kyle drops to one knee, his voice rising with worshipful intensity. "Barren, your deeds at Stonetooth Pass have spread far and wide. With a mere 100 soldiers, you held against 500 elite vanguard." Lord Irwin was so excited he nearly smashed his favorite teacup. Benjamin raises a hand, cutting through the praise. "Captain, thank you, but let's save the compliments for the victory banquet. What news do you bring from the front lines?" Kyle settles into a professional calm. "Lord Irwin has not failed your oath. Under the pretext of sweeping for bandits, he gathered 198 men. They traversed the impassable Grey Whisper Mountains by night. Currently, our forces are concealed in a valley just 3 miles from the enemy's flank." Kyle looks up firmly. "We are waiting for your signal. Once the flames are lit, we will strike from the shadows." "Good." Benjamin slams his fist against the table, the weight of the past few days finally lifting. "Excellent. Diona, call an emergency meeting. Kyle, I need every detail of your position." A ruthless, relaxed smile plays on Benjamin's lips. Just imagine their expressions when 200 men burst from their safe flank. It will be more entertaining than any comedy. Kyle salutes, his fist hitting his chest. "The blade of Silver Creek is ready, Baron. This time we will spread the carpet of victory." Benjamin pauses, then bursts into a laugh of pure, unbridled joy. The campfires flickered in the night, casting long shadows across the tired but resolute faces of the Frosttown defenders. Benjamin Blackwood stood atop an empty barrel, looking out over his men. Some were trained soldiers, others were mere farmers and blacksmiths, clutching spears with white-knuckled grips. "Brothers," Benjamin began, his voice cutting through the wind, "as your lord, I should give a flowery speech, but you all know I was once just a servant. I don't know the rules of the highborn." A few low laughs rippled through the crowd, easing the tension. Benjamin's expression turned serious. "They think we are fragile, they think we are peasants who will run, but look at the slopes of Stonetooth Pass. The Grand Duke's elite troops lie dead because of *us*. We are not just fighting a battle, we are creating a legend." He jumped down, his voice rising to a roar. "I cannot promise you riches or that every man will return home, but I promise you this, tonight the kingdom will remember the name Frosttown." Every man stood, no orders were given, they simply gripped their weapons and waited. Benjamin drew his longsword, the steel gleaming under the stars. "Let's end this." The scene shifts to tea. He high ground of Shia Pass. The night is as dark as ink. Beside Benjamin, the warrior Diona lit a mineral-infused smoke signal, a silent call to their allies in Silverbrook. Diona glanced at Benjamin's hands. "Sir, stay close to me when the fighting starts." Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "Do you think I'm weak?" "No," she replied softly, "but you are nervous." Benjamin looked down, his fist was trembling. It wasn't the fear of death that shook him, it was the crushing weight of responsibility. If this raid failed, the blood of every man here would be on his hands. Then a spark. In the distance, behind the enemy camp, a fire ignited. Then another. The Silverbrook reinforcements had arrived. Chaos erupted in the Western Frontier Army, whistles blew, tents collapsed, and screams drifted on the wind. The weight on Benjamin's chest vanished. The time for doubt was over. He turned to his men, his voice steady and cold. "Brothers of Frosttown, follow me." With a thunderous cry, the garrison charged. 2 forces converged in the darkness, destined to bring the battle to a bloody, final end. For Benjamin, the battlefield was a primal, bewildering blur. Here, thought is a luxury. There is no room for tactics, only the raw instinct to survive. Benjamin moved like a man possessed, piercing one man's throat, crushing another's skull with a spear shaft, and kicking a third to the ground before delivering a fatal slash. But in the chaos, his focus slipped. A clumsy swing nearly took him down, saved only by Diona's intervention. "My lord," Diona roared, his voice sharp with uncharacteristic anger, "for the sake of the gods, do not stray more than 5 paces from me." Benjamin rolled away, losing his sword but snatching up a heavy hammer spear from the mud. He swung the heavy iron into an infantryman's helmet with a sickening thud asterisk. As he stood panting, a stray arrow grazed his cheek. Which reckless bastard fired that? He roared, his eyes scanning the carnage, only to see young Geoffrey cornered by a knight in full plate armor. The knight's blade snapped Geoffrey's spear like a twig. "Behind you, you idiot!" Benjamin screamed. He lunged forward, slamming his hammer into the knight's back with a piercing, clang asterisk. The armor buckled. Benjamin struck again and again, 1, 2, 3 times, until the knight's helmet deformed and the metal giant went still. "Get up," Benjamin panted, kicking a trembling Geoffrey. "If you recite any more thank you poems on the battlefield, I'll have you washing shoes for 3 months." The night raid was a mess of swaying shadows and flickering fire, but slowly the tide turned. Diona's pistols flashed like silver arcs, and Kyle's Silverbrook cavalry shattered the remaining resistance. When the cavalry brandished the severed head of the enemy commander, the Westerlands will finally collapsed. "Surrender," the cry rose, "surrender and live." As silence fell over the groans of the wounded, Benjamin tried to stand straight, but the world tilted. Diona caught him just as he noticed a feathered shaft buried in his thigh. "Oh," Benjamin blinked, "so I was hit by an arrow." Despite the burning sting of the wound, Benjamin forced himself to stay upright. He met with Captain Kyle amidst the spoils of war, mountains of armor and captured supplies. They had won a clean, decisive triumph. As the first hint of dawn broke over the horizon, Benjamin watched his exhausted men. He felt the throb in his leg, but he didn't care. They were alive. Frosttown still stood, and finally, they could go home.